I was standing in front of my burning house watching 30 years of my life turn to ash when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I asked my family for help. "My house just burned down. Can I stay with someone tonight?" I typed into our family group chat, my hands shaking from more than just the December cold. My sister Carol's response came within seconds. "That's what hotels are for, Linda." Then my mother. "We can't disturb Carol's sleep schedule. Find a motel." And my father. He just sent a thumbs-up emoji to my mother's message. I stood there in the parking lot of what used to be my home reading those messages over and over, and something inside me shattered that had nothing to do with the fire. But here's what my family didn't know. That fire was about to expose secrets that went back 20 years. Secrets about $30,000 that disappeared. Secrets about lies my mother told. Secrets about the real reason my sister always came first. And when a powerful man saw what they did to me that night when my story went viral, and the truth came out in a courtroom, my family didn't just regret those text messages. They lost everything. Because the sister they abandoned in her darkest hour, she was about to become the one person who could destroy them all. This is the story of how I went from sleeping in a $40 motel room to watching my family beg for mercy they never showed me. And trust me, you won't believe how this ends. My name is Linda Smith. I'm 38 years old, and until the night of December 14th, I worked as a project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company where I'd spent the last 12 years building what I thought was a stable, respectable career. I lived alone in a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb, the kind of neighborhood where people mowed their lawns on Saturdays and waved to each other from driveways. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I'd worked hard for that comfort, saved, carefully lived within my means. I thought I'd done everything right. I was wrong. The first thing I noticed when I turned onto my street that December evening was the orange glow against the darkening sky. My street doesn't have streetlights that color, I remember thinking, my mind not yet willing to accept what my eyes were seeing. I had 2 grocery bags in my trunk, chicken breasts I'd planned to freeze vegetables for the week, a bottle of wine I was going to save for Christmas. Ordinary things. The things you buy when you believe your life is going to continue exactly as it has been. Then I saw the fire trucks. 3 of them, their red lights strobing across the faces of my neighbors who stood in clusters on the sidewalk, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. I pulled over a block away because the street was blocked, and I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel, telling myself it wasn't my house. It couldn't be my house. Mrs. Patterson 2 doors down had an old furnace. Or maybe the Jeffersons were having electrical work done. It wasn't my house. But when I got out of the car and started walking toward the cluster of emergency vehicles, I could feel the heat even from 50 feet away. That's when I knew. The devastating, impossible truth hit me like a physical blow. That orange glow was coming from my house. My home. The place I'd lived for 15 years, where I'd painted every room myself, where I'd refinished the hardwood floors on my hands and knees, where every corner held some small piece of my life. I started running. A firefighter caught me before I could get too close, his gloved hands firm on my shoulders. "Ma'am, you need to stay back. Is this your property?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, staring past him at the flames that were consuming my entire life. The roof had already partially collapsed. The windows had blown out. Black smoke poured from every opening, billowing into the winter sky. Inside that inferno were my photo albums from childhood, my grandmother's quilt, the dining table I'd saved 6 months to buy, my laptop with all my work files, my clothes, my books, my records and tax documents, the jewelry my father had given me before he became a stranger. Everything. "Is anyone inside?" the firefighter asked urgently. I shook my head. "Just me," I wanted to say. "I live alone." But my throat had closed up and I couldn't form the words. He nodded and radioed something to his team, then guided me to the side of a fire truck where I could stand without being in the way. I watched them work with brutal efficiency, spraying water into my house, breaking through what remained of the front door, moving with the practiced coordination of people who've seen this before. This was routine for them. For me, it was the end of everything I'd built. The cold December air cut through my coat, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was the heat on my face from 50 feet away and the surreal disconnect between the person I'd been 2 hours ago, the woman who worried about which brand of chicken to buy, and the person I was now. Homeless. That word kept circling in my mind. I'm homeless. At 38 years old, with a good job and a retirement account and a carefully maintained credit score, I was suddenly impossibly homeless. Neighbors I'd waved to for years stood in small groups watching. Mrs. Patterson came over and put her hand on my arm. "Oh, Linda, I'm so sorry. If there's anything we can do." But her eyes were already drifting back to the fire, drawn to the spectacle of destruction, the way people can't help but look at accidents on the highway. I nodded and said something I don't remember. "Thank you, probably. The things you say when there's nothing that can actually be said." It took them nearly 2 hours to get the fire under control. By then, the crowd of neighbors had thinned. People went back inside to their intact homes, their untouched possessions, their regular lives. The temperature had dropped into the 20s, and I stood there shivering, watching firefighters move in and out of the smoking shell of my house. The structure was still standing, but barely. Everything inside was destroyed. A man in a different uniform approached me, older, with a tired face and kind eyes. "Ms. Smith, I'm Fire Marshal Davidson. I'm very sorry about your home." He had a clipboard and a flashlight, and he gestured toward the house. "We'll need to do a full investigation, but from what I can see, the fire started in your basement. Looks like it originated near your electrical panel. Houses built in the 70s often have aluminum wiring that degrades over time. It's one of the most common causes of residential fires." I stared at him. Aluminum wiring. Something I'd never thought about, never knew to check, never imagined could destroy everything I owned. "I just had the house inspected 3 years ago when I refinanced," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant. "They didn't say anything about the wiring." He nodded sympathetically. "Not all inspectors check for it, unfortunately. And even when they do, the degradation can happen quickly." He handed me a card. "This has information about disaster relief services, temporary housing assistance, and the next steps for the investigation. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" The question hit me like cold water. Somewhere to stay. I looked at the smoking ruins of my house, at the fire trucks beginning to pack up their equipment, at the handful of remaining neighbors who were drifting back to their warm homes. I had my purse. I had my phone. I had the clothes I was wearing and my car with 2 bags of groceries in the trunk that would need to be thrown away. That was it. That was everything I had left in the world. "I'll figure something out," I heard myself say. The fire marshal nodded and walked away to talk to his crew. The firefighters were winding up their hoses, checking equipment, preparing to leave. Soon they'd all be gone, and I'd be standing here alone in front of the destroyed shell of my home with nowhere to go. The reality of that was starting to sink in through the shock. I needed a place to sleep tonight. I needed clothes for work tomorrow. I needed to figure out how to function when everything I owned no longer existed. The last fire truck pulled away around 9:30, leaving only a police officer to secure the scene with yellow tape. He nodded to me as he worked. "Sorry for your loss, ma'am. The fire marshal will be in touch about when you can access the property for the investigation." Then he got in his car and drove away too. I stood there in the empty street, in front of my destroyed home, completely alone. The neighbors' houses had their lights on warm, golden rectangles of windows showing normal evening activities. Someone watching television. Someone washing dishes in a kitchen. Lives continuing as they always had. My house was a dark, smoking silhouette against the night sky, still radiating heat, still smelling of burned wood and melted plastic and everything I'd lost. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The screen was bright in the darkness, showing my wallpaper, a photo of the garden I'd planted last spring, full of flowers that were now buried under ash and debris. I had to call someone. I had to ask for help. And there was only one group of people in the world who were supposed to help you when you had nothing left. Family. I opened the family group chat, the one Mom had created 2 years ago, and named Family with a red heart emoji that now felt like a sick joke. My hands were shaking as I typed out the message, trying to keep it simple, trying not to sound too desperate, even though I was desperate. I hit send and watched the message appear in the chat, my heart pounding. The read receipts started appearing almost immediately. Mom, then Carol, then Dad. I watched those little indicators, waiting for someone to respond to ask if I was okay to offer their guest room or their couch or anything. The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared. Someone was writing something, then deleting it, then writing again. And with nowhere else to go, I made the call that would change everything. I sat in my car in front of the burned house for another 10 minutes, staring at that group chat message I'd just sent, watching those read receipts appear one by one. Mom, Carol, Dad, all 3 of them had seen it. The typing bubbles appeared under Carol's name, disappeared, then appeared again. My heart was racing. Surely they were just shocked, trying to figure out the logistics of who had the most room, who lived closest, how to coordinate getting me settled for the night. That's what family does, right? When someone loses everything, you don't hesitate. You just help. Carol's message appeared first. That's what hotels are for, Linda. I read it 3 times before the words actually registered in my brain. 7 words. No, oh my God, are you okay? No, that's terrible, I'm so sorry. Just a cold, dismissive suggestion to check into a hotel, as if I'd texted asking for restaurant recommendations. I sat there in my car, the engine still running for heat, staring at those 7 words that somehow managed to convey exactly how little my sister cared that I'd just lost everything I owned. My fingers were shaking as I typed back. I was really hoping I could stay with family tonight. Just one night while I figure things out. I hit send and watched the read receipt appear immediately under my message. The typing bubbles came back. I have work tomorrow and need my sleep. My guest room is being renovated anyway. That was a lie. I'd been to Carol's house just 2 months ago for her birthday dinner that Mom had insisted I attend. The guest room had been perfectly fine, decorated in soft grays, with a queen bed and an ensuite bathroom. Carol had even mentioned she was thinking about getting new curtains for it. There was no renovation. She just didn't want me there. Before I could respond, Mom's message appeared. Carol's right, honey. We can't have you here because it might disturb Carol's sleep schedule. You know she has that big presentation tomorrow at work. Just get a motel room and we'll talk this weekend about next steps. These things happen and you're strong. You'll figure it out. I stared at those words until they blurred. Carol's sleep schedule. Carol's presentation. As if my entire house burning down was somehow less important than my sister getting 8 uninterrupted hours before a work meeting. I looked up at the smoking remains of my home, then back at my phone. Surely Dad would say something? Surely he'd see how cruel this was and step in. A blue thumbs-up emoji appeared under Mom's message. Dad's response. Not even words. Just a thumbs up, as if Mom had suggested a good restaurant or shared a funny meme. My father's entire reaction to my house burning down and my desperate request for a place to sleep was a thumbs-up emoji. I needed to get away from this street, away from my burned house and the few remaining neighbors who kept glancing over at me sitting in my car. I drove to the nearest diner, a 24-hour place called Mel's, that I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. The parking lot was half full with the late-night crowd truck drivers, night shift workers, insomniacs, and apparently newly homeless women whose families had just abandoned them. Inside, the fluorescent lights were too bright, and the air smelled like coffee and fryer grease. I slid into a booth in the back corner and ordered coffee I didn't want from a waitress who didn't care. Around me, people were eating burgers and pancakes, having normal Tuesday night dinners. At the booth across from me, a family with 2 teenage kids were laughing about something passing ketchup back and forth, existing in their bubble of normalcy. The mother was wiping a spot off her daughter's shirt. The father was stealing a fry from his son's plate. Ordinary family moments happening all around me while I sat alone staring at a group chat that had just confirmed what I'd maybe always known, but never let myself fully believe. I wasn't a priority in my family. I'd never been a priority. I opened the chat again and scrolled up looking at months of messages. Mom sharing articles about Carol's industry. Dad sending congratulations when Carol got a promotion. Carol posting photos of her apartment, her dinners out, her weekend trips. And scattered among all of that, my own messages, most of them unanswered or acknowledged with a brief, nice, or good for you. When I'd mentioned I was up for a promotion at work 3 months ago, no one had responded at all. When Carol mentioned she was thinking about buying new patio furniture, there were 17 messages of advice and enthusiasm. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking. I looked at the time on my phone. 9:47. I needed to find a place to sleep, but I couldn't make myself move. I kept reading those messages over and over. That's what hotels are for. Can't disturb Carol's sleep schedule. A thumbs up emoji. My house had burned down. I'd lost everything I owned, and my family's response was to tell me to handle it myself because my sister needed her rest. But their cruelty that night wasn't the worst part. Not even close. I found the cheapest motel I could on my phone, a place called the Starlight Inn that charged $49 a night and had reviews that used words like adequate and basic but clean. It was 2 miles from the diner tucked behind a gas station on a frontage road I'd driven past 100 times without noticing. The kind of place where people stayed when they had no better options. People like me now. The room smelled like industrial cleaner trying to mask decades of cigarette smoke, even though a laminated sign on the door promised it was non-smoking. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern rough under my fingers, with a texture that suggested it had been washed too many times with too much bleach. The heater rattled in the corner, barely pushing out warm air. I sat on the edge of the bed in the same clothes I'd been wearing since this morning when I'd been a person with a home and a life and a future that made sense, and I couldn't make myself lie down. Instead, I stared at the water-stained ceiling tiles and let the memories come. I was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when Mom came home with an enormous sheet cake. Carol had won the school spelling bee, beating out 5th graders even though she was only in 4th grade. Mom was ecstatic. She called everyone Grandma Aunt Susan, the neighbors. Within an hour, our house was full of people celebrating Carol. The cake had her name in blue frosting with little decorated bees around the border. Everyone took pictures. Carol beamed in the center of every photo, the star of her own show. That same year, I'd brought home my first report card with straight A's. I remembered being so excited running into the house to show Mom, certain this would be my cake moment. Mom had glanced at it while stirring something on the stove and said, "That's nice, dear. Put it on the fridge." Then she went back to making Carol's favorite dinner pot roast with those little potatoes Carol loved. I'd taped my report card to the refrigerator myself, tucked behind a magnet where it stayed for 2 years until it faded and fell off and no one noticed. The pattern was there from the beginning. I just hadn't had the words for it yet. Birthday parties were Carol's events that I was permitted to attend. When Carol turned 7, she had a princess party with a rented costume and a pink castle cake. When I turned 7 2 years later, Mom suggested a combined party with Carol's upcoming 9th birthday to save money. It was Carol-themed. Always Carol-themed. She got spa parties with her friends in middle school. I got a family dinner at a restaurant Carol chose. Christmas mornings told the same story year after year. Carol unwrapped name-brand clothes, the expensive sneakers she'd circled in magazines, the latest electronics. I got practical gifts wrapped in less expensive paper. Socks, school supplies, a winter coat from the clearance rack. One year I got Carol's old stereo that she'd grown tired of wrapped up as if it were new. When I got accepted to Oregon State, the same tier of university where Carol was finishing her sophomore year at an expensive private school in California, I walked into the kitchen with my acceptance letter feeling like maybe finally I'd done something that would make my parents as proud as they were of Carol. Dad looked at the letter and said, "That's wonderful, honey, but you know we can't afford out-of-state tuition for both of you. Carol's already established there. You're going to need to be practical." Practical meant community college for 2 years while working part-time at a grocery store, then transferring to the state school 30 minutes from home. Practical meant watching Carol's college experience on Facebook while I commuted to classes between shifts. When I asked how they afforded Carol's school, Mom said they'd taken out loans and made sacrifices because Carol's program was so prestigious. The implication was clear. Carol's education was an investment. Mine was an expense. When Carol needed a security deposit for her first apartment after college, Dad wrote a check that same day. When I asked for help with my deposit a year later, Mom said, "You've always been so independent, Linda. You don't need help the way Carol does. You'll figure it out." So I slept on a friend's couch for 2 months and worked double shifts until I had the money. And I did figure it out. I always figured it out. That was my role. The independent one. The one who didn't need things. The one who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. Every family photo on Mom's mantle confirmed the hierarchy. Carol in the center, perfectly lit, smiling. Linda off to the side, slightly out of focus, slightly less important. Even physically, the camera had learned where to look. Lying in that scratchy motel bed, I finally understood what this was. Not favoritism, not preference. Systematic positioning of one child as the valuable one and the other as the support system. I'd been trained my entire life not to need, not to ask, not to expect care. And I'd internalized it so completely that even tonight, when I'd sent that message asking for help, part of me had already known what the answer would be. But one memory hurt more than all the others. The wedding money. The memory I'd been avoiding all night finally surfaced as I lay in that motel bed staring at the ceiling. 5 years ago. The phone call that would change everything, though I didn't know it then. Mom's voice had that particular tone she used when she needed something bright and urgent at the same time. "Linda, honey, I need to talk to you about something important. It's about Carol's wedding." I'd been at my desk at work, eating lunch at my computer like I always did. Carol had been engaged for 6 months to a man named David who worked in finance, someone Mom talked about constantly with barely concealed pride. They're planning the most beautiful wedding, but they've run into a little problem with the budget. You know how David's family is very traditional, very particular about appearances. If the wedding isn't elegant enough, it could reflect poorly on Carol. I'd set down my sandwich, already feeling the familiar tightening in my chest that came whenever my family needed something from me. "What kind of problem?" "Well, they're just a little short. The venue they want, the one that would really impress David's parents, costs more than they'd budgeted for. And you know Carol, she's been dreaming of this day her whole life. You're so good with money, Linda, and you've been saving for years. We were hoping you might be able to help bridge the gap. Just temporarily, of course." The word temporarily should have been my first warning. How much is the gap? There was a pause just long enough for me to know the number would be bad. Around $30,000. I'd actually laughed thinking it was a joke. $30,000 wasn't a gap. It wasn't a bridge. It was nearly everything I had. I'd been saving since my first job at 16, putting away money, religiously dreaming of eventually buying a bigger house, or maybe taking a real vacation for once in my life. My entire savings account held $32,000. "Mom, I can't give Carol my entire life savings." "Not give, honey. Loan. She'll pay you back as soon as they get settled after the wedding. 2 years maximum. You know Carol's responsible. And think about what this means for her future. David comes from a very good family. This wedding could set the tone for her entire marriage. You'd be investing in your sister's happiness." The way she phrased it made me the selfish one if I said no. I was investing in Carol's happiness. I was helping family. I was being the good sister, the reliable one, the one who could always be counted on to sacrifice. "I don't know, Mom. That's everything I have." "But you don't need it right now, do you? You have your house, your job, you're stable. Carol needs this. Please, Linda. She's your sister." I told Mom I needed to think about it. 20 minutes later, Carol called. That should have been my second warning, the coordinated tag team approach, but I was too surprised by Carol's warmth to notice the manipulation. She'd barely spoken to me in months, except for obligatory holiday texts. "Linda, I know Mom already talked to you, and I just want you to know how much this means to me." Her voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "I know we haven't been as close as we should be. I know I haven't always been the best sister. But this wedding, it's everything I've dreamed about. The venue is this beautiful historic mansion with gardens and a fountain, and David's parents will be there with all their family friends, and I just need everything to be perfect. You'd be saving my life, sis." She called me sis. Carol never called me sis. "It's a lot of money, Carol." "I know, and I promise, I swear on everything, I'll pay you back. As soon as David and I get settled into our careers, I'll start making payments. 2 years tops. You know I'm good for it." She paused. "Family helps family, right? And maybe this could be a new start for us. A chance to actually be real sisters." That's what got me. Not the wedding, not Mom's pressure, but the possibility that giving Carol this money might finally earn me a place in my own family. That maybe generosity could buy what blood hadn't given me. Love, recognition, value. Carol texted me that night after I'd agreed. "Thank you so much for the loan, sis. I'll pay you back as soon as we're settled, I promise." With a red heart emoji. I'd screenshot that message and saved it to 3 different places on my phone and computer. Even then, some part of me knew I needed proof. But taking that screenshot had made me feel guilty, like I was already planning for betrayal, like documenting the loan made me a bad sister who didn't trust family. I transferred the full $30,000 the next day, keeping only $2,000 in my account for emergencies. No contract, no payment schedule, no collateral. Just a text message promise, and my desperate hope that this would finally make them see me. For 3 weeks, Carol sent grateful messages, photos of her dress shopping, updates about the flowers she'd chosen. She signed off every text with, "Love you, sis." I felt warm. Reading those messages, felt included for the first time in years. The wedding was beautiful, elegant, perfect. Everything Mom had promised David's family would expect. I stood in the back during the ceremony, watching Carol glow in a dress that cost more than my car, and I felt proud that I'd helped make this happen. Then the thank you cards went out after the honeymoon, and mine never came. 1 year later, when I gently asked about starting repayment, Carol texted back, "Things are tight right now, we're still getting settled into the house. Can we talk about this later?" 2 years later. "Money's really tight with all the new furniture and the renovations. I'll start paying you back when things ease up." 3 years later, when I asked again, "I thought that was a gift. Mom said you wanted to help with the wedding." 4 years later, Carol stopped responding to my messages about the money entirely. She'd read them, I could see the read receipts, but no reply would come. That $30,000 hadn't bought me a sister. It had bought Carol a perfect wedding, and me the clearest possible message about my worth in this family. I didn't know then that this money would destroy more than my savings. I finally lay back on the motel bed around midnight, still fully clothed, still wearing my coat because the rattling heater in the corner was losing its battle against the December cold. The bedspread felt slightly damp under my back, rough with that texture that comes from being washed too many times in industrial machines with harsh detergent. When I turned my head, I could see a cigarette burn on the nightstand, a small brown circle scarred into the laminate despite the bold "no smoking" sign on the back of the door. The overhead light flickered occasionally, casting unstable shadows across water-stained ceiling tiles. This room cost $49 a night. I'd checked the nightly rate 3 times on my phone, comparing it against other options, before choosing this place, because it was the cheapest option that didn't have reviews mentioning bedbugs or crime. $49 for a space that thousands of strangers had occupied before me, leaving behind their particular smell of desperation and transition that no amount of air freshener could fully mask. I'd sprayed my house with fresh paint just 6 months ago. I'd spent 3 weekends refinishing the kitchen cabinets myself, sanding them by hand until my shoulders ached, applying coat after coat of white paint until they gleamed. I'd finally saved enough to buy the sectional sofa I'd wanted for 2 years, real leather, that felt substantial and permanent. I'd created a space that was entirely mine after 15 years of mortgage payments and careful improvements. Now I was lying in a motel room that felt like the opposite of everything I'd built. Temporary, impersonal, a place where people stayed when they had no better options. I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat again. I'd already read the messages a dozen times, but I kept going back, kept analyzing each word as if I might find some hidden warmth I'd missed before. That's what hotels are for, Linda. 7 words that somehow became more cruel each time I read them. No question about whether I was okay. No concern about what I'd lost. Just a cold dismissal, as if I'd asked for a minor favor instead of refuge after losing everything. I scrolled up through the chat history and my stomach twisted. An hour ago, while I was sitting in the diner trying to process my family's rejection, Mom had sent a message to the group. "Carol, there's a sale at Nordstrom this weekend, 40% off. Thought you'd want to know." Carol had responded with 3 exclamation points and, "Thanks, Mom, I've been wanting new boots." They were talking about shopping, planning a mother-daughter trip to the mall, continuing their normal lives while I sat in a $49 motel room with nothing but the clothes on my back. Maybe I was being overdramatic. Maybe I should just handle this alone like I'd handled everything else my entire life. The independent one, the stable one, the one who figures it out. I stared at the flickering light fixture and felt something that had been cracking all night finally break open completely. I called Mom's cell phone. It rang 4 times before she answered, and her tone was already annoyed. "Linda, it's late." "I know, I'm sorry, I just needed to talk to someone. I'm at a motel and I'm feeling really alone and scared, and I just thought maybe—" "You're 38 years old," Mom interrupted. "This is part of being an adult. Houses catch fire. Insurance exists for a reason. You'll file a claim and rebuild. I don't understand why you're making this into a family crisis." The dismissal in her voice was so complete that I couldn't breathe for a second. "Mom, I lost everything. Every single thing I own is gone. I just thought my family might want to help me through one night." "Do you know how much we've helped Carol over the years?" Mom's voice was sharp now. "Do you have any idea the sacrifices we've made for her education, her wedding, her career? You've always been the independent one, Linda. You've always been fine on your own. We thought you'd be fine now, too." "What about the $30,000? The words came out before I could stop them. "I gave Carol my entire life savings for her wedding 5 years ago, and she's never paid back a single dollar. If I had that money now, I could afford a decent place to stay while I figure this out." Mom's silence was colder than the December air outside. When she spoke again, her voice was ice. "Don't you dare bring that up now. Carol used that money for her marriage, which is an investment in her future. You're being selfish and manipulative, Linda, using this fire as an excuse to guilt us about old money. That money was a gift to help your sister, and only a truly vindictive person would throw it back in her face during a crisis. We're done with this conversation." The line went dead. I sat in the dark motel room, my phone still pressed to my ear, listening to silence. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. Not broken. Shifted. Like tectonic plates moving deep underground, changing the landscape forever. Then the call came. The one that would start the chain reaction. The call that started the chain reaction wasn't dramatic. It was my supervisor, Karen, checking in the morning after the fire. Her voice was genuinely concerned, asking if I needed a few days off to deal with insurance and finding temporary housing. I'd said yes, grateful, and spent the next 3 days in a fog of phone calls with the insurance company, filing police reports for documentation and searching for affordable short-term rentals that didn't require first month last month and a security deposit I no longer had. On the 3rd morning, I was sitting on the motel bed with my laptop balanced on my knees trying to fill out the insurance claim form for the dozenth time when the email notification appeared in the corner of my screen. From Human Resources. Subject line: required meeting. Employee wellness concern. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. I clicked on the message and read words that didn't make sense, that couldn't possibly be about me. Dear Linda, we need to schedule a meeting to discuss some concerning reports we've received regarding your emotional stability and professional conduct. It has been brought to our attention that you have been using your recent personal tragedy to manipulate colleagues and that there have been observations of erratic behavior in the workplace. We take employee wellness seriously and want to ensure you're receiving appropriate support. Please respond to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. Each time the words became more impossible. Emotional stability, manipulate colleagues, erratic behavior. I'd worked at this company for 12 years. My performance reviews were consistently excellent. I was known for being steady, reliable, the person who stayed calm during deadline crunches while everyone else panicked. I'd trained half the current staff. I'd never missed a deadline, never had a complaint filed against me, never been anything other than utterly professional. These accusations were the opposite of who I was, who I'd always been. I scrolled back through the email, reading more carefully now, and certain phrases began to stand out like neon signs. Emotionally unstable. That was a phrase Carol had used about me for years, usually when explaining to Mom why she couldn't deal with my requests for loan repayment. Using her situation for sympathy. Carol had said almost those exact words 3 years ago when I'd mentioned the wedding money at a family dinner. History of family drama that she brings to work. I'd never brought family drama to work. I'd barely told anyone at the office about my family beyond surface-level small talk. I'd mentioned the fire to Karen, my direct supervisor, because I needed a few days off. That was it. But someone had told HR about my difficult family situation. Someone had painted a picture of me as unstable, manipulative, dramatic. Someone had used language that sounded exactly like Carol describing me. My hands started shaking. I set the laptop aside and moved to the bathroom, the only place in the motel room with decent lighting, and sat on the closed toilet lid with my phone. I opened my text messages and scrolled back through the timeline. 2 weeks ago, I'd sent Carol a carefully worded message. Hi, Carol, I hate to bring this up, but I'm in a tough financial spot and really need to start getting repayment on that wedding loan. Even partial payments would help. Can we make a plan? Read receipt showed she'd seen it immediately. No response. 1 week ago, the fire. The group chat rejection. 3 days ago, the phone call with Mom where I'd mentioned the $30,000 and Mom had called me selfish and manipulative before hanging up. This morning, an HR email using Carol's exact language to describe me, sent to my workplace, designed to destroy my professional credibility. The timing was too perfect. The language was too specific. This wasn't a coincidence. This was coordinated, calculated. Someone, Carol or Carol with Mom's help, had contacted my HR department and fed them a narrative designed to make me look unstable. And they'd done it right after I'd brought up the loan money, right after I'd dared to ask for what I was owed. I sat in that motel bathroom with fluorescent light buzzing overhead and understood what was happening. This wasn't just about the fire or the rejection or even the money. This was about making sure I couldn't fight back. If I pursued the loan repayment, if I told people how my family had treated me, I'd already be labeled as the unstable one, the dramatic one, the one whose word couldn't be trusted because she was emotionally compromised and manipulative. They were preemptively destroying my credibility so that when I spoke the truth, no one would believe me. My career was 12 years of excellent work, of reliability, of professionalism. And Carol was trying to burn it down with the same efficiency as the electrical fire that had taken my house. For professional women, my age being labeled emotionally unstable at work was a death sentence. Once that reputation attached itself, it followed you. Future employers Googled your name. References got called. The whisper network of HR departments shared information. I wasn't just fighting for a place to sleep anymore. I wasn't just fighting for my money back. I was about to lose more than my home. I spent $40 I couldn't afford at a discount store that morning, buying a pair of black pants and a blue blouse that would pass for professional attire. Everything I'd owned for work had burned the tailored suits I'd collected over 12 years, the good shoes, the simple jewelry that made me look polished and competent. Now I was walking into my office building wearing clothes that still had the fold creases from the package fabric that felt synthetic and cheap against my skin shoes that were already giving me blisters. The HR conference room was on the third floor, a windowless space with gray walls and a long table. I'd been in this room exactly twice before, once for new hire orientation 12 years ago, and once for a company-wide benefits presentation. Now I was here because someone had destroyed my reputation with lies. Two HR representatives sat across from me, a man and a woman I'd seen in the hallways but never worked with directly. They had manila folders in front of them closed, and their expressions were professionally sympathetic in that way that meant they'd already decided how this meeting would end. Neither of them smiled when I sat down. "Linda, thank you for coming in," the woman said. Her name tag read Jennifer. "We want to start by saying that we're concerned about your well-being given your recent instability." Instability. The word hung in the air like an accusation. "I'm not unstable," I said carefully. "My house burned down. I've been dealing with insurance and temporary housing, but I'm managing everything appropriately." The man whose name tag read Michael opened his folder. "We've received reports that give us some concern. Multiple colleagues have mentioned that you've been crying at your desk, taking excessive personal calls during work hours, and sharing exaggerated stories about your family situation to gain sympathy from coworkers." My hands went cold. "That's not true. I haven't been at my desk in 3 days. I've been on approved leave dealing with the fire." "These reports are from before your leave," Jennifer said smoothly. "Going back several weeks." Several weeks. Before the fire even happened. Someone had been building a case against me, planting seeds of instability in HR's mind, so that when I needed help most, I'd already be labeled as a problem. "Who reported this?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "We can't disclose that information. The reports came through our confidential wellness line." Michael's tone suggested this was completely reasonable. "But what concerns us is the pattern. The emotional displays, the use of work time for personal drama, the stories about family conflicts that several employees have found uncomfortable." I'd never cried at my desk. I'd never discussed my family at work beyond superficial pleasantries. And I noticed immediately who wasn't in this room. Karen, my supervisor for 8 years, who would have defended me, who knew my work quality, who could have confirmed that none of these accusations matched reality. "Where's Karen?" I asked. "She's my direct supervisor. Shouldn't she be here?" Jennifer and Michael exchanged a glance. "We felt it was better to handle this at the HR level given the sensitive nature of the concerns." They'd deliberately excluded the one person who knew me who could contradict their narrative. This wasn't a wellness check. This was a setup. "Linda." Jennifer said, her voice taking on that tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "They want you to accept quietly. We're considering the best path forward for everyone. What we'd like to suggest is that you take some time to stabilize your personal situation before returning to full duties. It's not a suspension," she added quickly. "Just a voluntary leave of absence for your own good." Voluntary. The word was doing heavy lifting there. I looked at their faces and understood the trap perfectly. If I argued, if I showed any emotion at all, I'd be confirming their story that I was unstable. If I complied and left, I'd lose my income exactly when I needed it most. The motel was $49 a night. I had maybe $300 in my checking account. Without my paycheck, I'd be on the street in a week. "My performance reviews have been excellent for 12 years, I said, keeping my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "My personal situation hasn't affected my work quality. I don't understand why I'm being asked to leave." Another glance between them. Michael slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is just a form acknowledging that you're choosing to take unpaid leave to focus on your personal well-being. It protects both you and the company." I read it quickly. Legal language that made it sound like I was voluntarily stepping away like this was my choice, my decision to prioritize my mental health. But between the lines, the message was clear: sign this, or we'll move to formal disciplinary action. Sign this, or we'll make your life even worse. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady as I signed my name, and I was proud of that steadiness. I thanked them professionally, gathered my purse, and walked out of that conference room with my head high and my spine straight. I made it to my car in the parking garage before the tears came, and they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage so pure and hot that my whole body shook with it. 12 years. I'd given this company 12 years of reliability, of staying late when projects needed finishing, of training new employees, of covering shifts when colleagues called in sick. I'd been the steady one, the dependable one, the one who never caused problems. And my own sister had destroyed it all with a phone call. I sat in my car with my hands gripping the steering wheel, and I felt the weight of everything I'd lost crashing down at once. My home, my family's support, and now my job. At 38 years old, being pushed out of work this way was terrifying. I knew how this worked. The whispers, the careful phrasing and references, the way HR departments talk to each other. This accusation would follow me. But underneath the fear and the grief, something else was forming, something harder and colder than anything I'd felt before. And then Mom defended Carol's actions. I called Mom from my car in the parking garage, my hands still shaking with rage, no longer caring about being polite or keeping the peace or not making waves. Those rules had gotten me exactly nowhere. I'd followed them my entire life, and they'd led me here to a parking garage where I'd just been forced out of my job based on lies my own sister had told. Mom answered on the third ring. "Linda, this isn't a good time." "Did Carol contact my workplace?" I asked, my voice flat and hard. No preamble, no softening. Just the direct question I should have asked years ago about 100 different things. There was a long pause. In that silence, I heard everything I needed to know. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was defensive in that particular way that meant she was about to justify something indefensible. "I don't know what you're talking about, but if someone from your job reached out to family for context about your behavior, Carol was just being honest about your history. You've always been sensitive, Linda. You've always made things harder than they need to be. If HR had questions about your stability, well, maybe there are reasons for those questions." My blood went cold. She'd just confirmed it. Carol had contacted my workplace. And worse, Mom thought it was justified. "Mom, you just admitted Carol talked to my HR department. You just said she was being honest about me." "I didn't say that." Mom's voice turned sharp. "I said if someone asked, we would tell the truth. Don't put words in my mouth, Linda. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You twist things, you create drama where there is none. You make yourself the victim of situations you've created." I was sitting in my car, having just lost my job because of anonymous reports that used my sister's exact language to describe me, and my mother was telling me I was imagining it. I'm not imagining anything. Carol called my HR department and told them I was emotionally unstable. She said I was using the fire for sympathy. Those are her words, Mom, her exact phrases. "You're upset, so you're connecting dots that aren't there." Mom's tone had shifted to that patronizing patience she used when she'd already decided I was being irrational. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that concerns people, Linda. You're always creating drama, always looking for reasons to be upset with Carol. Your sister has her own life and career. She's not thinking about you that much. She's not sitting around plotting against you. You need to stop being paranoid and focus on getting yourself together instead of blaming everyone else for your problems." The gaslighting was so complete, so practiced, that I almost questioned myself for a moment. Almost. But I had the HR email on my phone. I had the timeline. I had the evidence of what had been done to me, and my mother was sitting on the phone telling me I'd imagined it all. What about the $30,000 Carol owes me? I asked, my voice tight. Is that drama I created too? Mom's tone turned to ice. That money was a gift to help your sister's marriage. You gave it freely, Linda. Only a truly selfish person would demand it back during a crisis. You're making this whole tragedy about money, about keeping score, about punishing Carol for having a better life than you. It's ugly, and it's beneath you. A gift. 5 years of asking for repayment. 5 years of Carol's promises and delays and eventual silence. And now it was retroactively a gift because that's what my mother needed it to be. Because acknowledging that Carol had borrowed and refused to repay would mean acknowledging that Carol was flawed. And Carol couldn't be flawed. Carol was Mom's success story. Carol's beautiful wedding. Carol's nice apartment. Carol's professional achievements were all proof that Mom had done a good job as a mother. I was the other one, the independent one, the one who didn't reflect well on Mom because I'd done everything myself without help, without fanfare. I didn't provide Mom with bragging rights at church or stories to share with her friends. Carol did that. Carol was the daughter Mom could take credit for. You're not protecting Carol, I said quietly. You're protecting your image. You need Carol to be perfect because her success makes you look good. And you need me to be the problem because it explains why you never helped me the way you helped her. How dare you, Mom hissed. After everything we've done for this family, after all the sacrifices we've made, you have the audacity to— What have you sacrificed for me? I interrupted. Name one thing you sacrificed for me that you didn't sacrifice 10 times over for Carol. The line went dead. Mom had hung up. I sat in the parking garage with my phone in my hand, and the crushing weight of understanding settled over me. I'd been fighting my entire life for people who not only didn't love me the way I needed to be loved, but who actively saw me as expendable, as a resource for Carol, as a supporting character in Carol's story. Mom would sacrifice me 1,000 times over before she'd admit that Carol was anything less than perfect because Carol's perfection was tied to Mom's identity as a mother. The grief of that realization was crushing, but underneath the grief was something else. Clarity. Cold, hard clarity about exactly who these people were and what I meant to them, but the world was about to choose a side too. 2 weeks after the fire, I found myself sitting in a circle of metal folding chairs in the basement of a community center on 5th Street, surrounded by people I'd never met who understood loss in a way my own family never would. The fire marshal had given me a list of resources before he'd left that night, and this support group for disaster victims had been on it. I'd thrown the card in my purse and forgotten about it until the motel room walls started closing in, and I realized I needed to be around people who might actually understand what I was going through. There were 8 of us that evening. A couple whose apartment had flooded. A man whose restaurant had burned in an electrical fire similar to mine. A woman whose house had been destroyed in a storm. We sat in that circle and took turns sharing our stories, and for the first time since the fire, I felt like I could breathe. When it was my turn, I didn't plan what I was going to say. I just started talking. I told them about coming home to find my house engulfed in flames, about watching 15 years of my life turn to ash. I told them about standing in the cold with nowhere to go and reaching out to my family for help. My voice stayed steady until I got to the part about the group chat, about typing that desperate message, asking for a place to stay, and watching the read receipts appear one by one. When I described reading "That's what hotels are for," while standing in front of my burned house, my voice cracked. I had to stop and take a breath. A woman across the circle reached over and squeezed my hand. Several others had tears in their eyes. The facilitator, an older man named Robert, who'd lost his home in a fire 10 years ago, nodded with understanding. "The house is just wood and drywall," he said quietly. "It's the people who are supposed to be your foundation that hurt the most when they crumble." After the session ended, a younger woman approached me. She'd been sitting in the back taking notes, and she introduced herself as Jennifer, a social worker who volunteered with a local community organization. "Linda, I'm so sorry for what you've been through," she said. Would you be willing to do a short interview for our Facebook page? We're trying to raise awareness about the reality of displacement after fires. A lot of people don't understand the practical challenges, and hearing from someone like you might help other victims feel less alone. I hesitated. I wasn't looking for attention or pity, but Jennifer's earnest face and the thought that maybe my experience could help someone else made me agree. We sat in 2 chairs in the corner of the room, and she pulled out her phone to record. The interview lasted maybe 3 minutes. Jennifer asked about the practical challenges I'd faced since the fire. I talked about navigating insurance companies that wanted endless documentation of items I no longer had proof I'd owned. I talked about trying to find temporary housing when you don't have first month, last month, and a security deposit. I talked about replacing basic documents like my driver's license and social security card that had burned. And then Jennifer asked what the hardest part had been. The hardest part wasn't losing my possessions, I heard myself say. It was realizing that when you have nothing, you find out who truly cares. Jennifer posted the video that evening. I didn't think much of it. I went back to my motel room, ate a sandwich from a gas station, and fell asleep with the television on for company. By the next morning, the video had 50,000 views. I woke up to dozens of notifications on my phone. Messages from old high school friends I hadn't talked to in years. Emails from local news stations asking for interviews. Facebook friend requests from strangers. The video had been shared and shared again, spreading across community pages throughout the state. The comments were overwhelming. Hundreds of people expressing support, sharing their own stories of family betrayal, offering donations and help. By the end of the week, the video had been viewed over 200,000 times. Local radio shows were discussing it. A newspaper ran a story about the challenges disaster victims face. The comment sections were filled with older women sharing their own experiences with family favoritism and rejection. People were angry on my behalf in a way that felt both validating and slightly terrifying. But it was the screenshot that changed everything. Someone from the support group had seen my phone when I'd shown photos of my burned house to the circle. They must have glimpsed the family group chat still open on my screen. I never found out who it was, but someone took a screenshot of those messages, carefully blacked out all the names, and posted it alongside the video. The caption read, "This is what she was dealing with while her house burned. This is her family's response." The text messages were there for the world to see. That's what hotels are for, Linda. We can't have you here because it might disturb Carol's sleep schedule. The thumbs up emoji. All of it laid bare for thousands of people to read and judge. The response was immediate and fierce. The post went viral faster than the video had. Local news picked it up. Radio hosts read the messages on air, their voices dripping with disgust. The comments section exploded with outrage. People were tagging friends, sharing their own stories of being treated as less important than their siblings, expressing fury at the casual cruelty of those messages. The story had taken on a life of its own far beyond anything I'd intended. It resonated because it was universal. Everyone knew a family like this or had been the Linda in their own family. The pressure was building, spreading in directions I couldn't see or control. And somewhere out there, a very important man was watching. I had no idea that the man who would change everything was watching that video 2 weeks after it was posted, sitting in a corner office on the 15th floor of a building downtown, taking a rare lunch break at his desk. Richard Morrison was 56 years old, a senior executive at Morrison & Associates, a firm he'd built from the ground up over 25 years, through careful decisions and an almost obsessive attention to character. He'd never married, had devoted himself to his career and to taking care of his elderly mother, and prided himself on being able to read people. It was a skill that had served him well in business, helping him avoid bad partnerships and identify talent others overlooked. He was scrolling through his social media feed, something he rarely did when the video appeared. A woman sitting in a simple chair, talking about losing her home in a fire. He almost scrolled past it, but something about her composure caught his attention. She wasn't crying or performing grief. She was just calmly, clearly explaining what it felt like to lose everything, and then discover that your family didn't care. He watched the video once. Then he watched it again. The woman's voice when she said, The hardest part wasn't losing my possessions. It was realizing that when you have nothing, you find out who truly cares. Struck something deep in him. He'd grown up with a father who'd abandoned the family when Richard was 12. He knew what it felt like to discover that blood didn't guarantee loyalty. He scrolled down to the comments and found the screenshot that everyone was sharing. The family group chat messages. "That's what hotels are for, Linda." He stared at those words for a long moment, feeling something close to anger. This woman's house had just burned down, and her family's response was to suggest a hotel, as if she'd simply missed a flight instead of losing everything she owned. The casual cruelty of it offended every value he'd built his life on. He found himself thinking about it throughout the afternoon between meetings and phone calls. The video stayed with him in a way that surprised him. There was something about the woman's dignity, the way she'd held herself together while describing such profound rejection that he couldn't shake. The next morning, his assistant Sarah stopped by his office with coffee and the particular expression she wore when she had gossip she thought he should know about. "Did you see that viral video going around? The woman whose house burned down and her family rejected her?" Richard nodded. "I saw it yesterday." "Well, apparently the sister, the one who was so cold to her, works here. Carol Kay in marketing." Sarah lowered her voice. "People are talking about it at the water cooler. Someone recognized the situation from things Carol said about her sister." Richard felt his blood go cold. Carol Kay, Carol Kinsley. The woman he'd been dating for 6 months. The woman he'd taken to company events and introduced to his mother. The woman he'd been seriously considering proposing to after the holidays. Carol had mentioned her sister's house fire in passing 3 weeks ago. They'd been having dinner and she'd checked her phone and said, "Oh, my sister's house caught fire. That's unfortunate." Richard had asked if her sister was okay, and Carol had waved it off. "She's fine. Linda's the type who always lands on her feet. She's very independent, very capable of handling these things herself. Not like me." She'd smiled at him over her wine glass, and he'd been charmed by what he'd thought was self-awareness. Now sitting at his desk with his assistant's words hanging in the air, Richard felt the first stirrings of doubt. Carol had told him stories about her sister over the months they'd been dating. Linda was dramatic. Linda was jealous of Carol's success. Linda had tried to ruin Carol's wedding by making everything about money. Linda was emotionally unstable and couldn't maintain relationships. Carol had painted a picture of a difficult, troubled sister who caused problems and demanded attention. But what if that picture was a lie? Richard spent the rest of the day paying attention in a way he hadn't before. He thought about how Carol talked about her family, always positioning herself as the reasonable one dealing with difficult people. He remembered her mentioning that her sister had loaned her money for the wedding, but then acted like it was a bigger deal than it was. "She gave me $30,000 and then spent years throwing it in my face like I owed her something," Carol had said. "It was a gift to help me start my marriage, but Linda can't stand that I'm happy." $30,000. A gift. But the woman in the video had talked about losing everything. If Linda had given Carol $30,000 and never been repaid and then lost her home in a fire and asked for help, and Carol had responded with, "That's what hotels are for." What did that say about the woman Richard was dating? He'd built his entire career on integrity. He surrounded himself with people of character, people who could be trusted, people whose word meant something. His reputation in the business community was built on the foundation of being someone who valued ethics over profit, who treated people fairly, who could be counted on to do the right thing. If Carol was the villain in this story, if she was the cold sister who'd rejected a sibling in crisis, what did that say about his judgment? What did it say about him that he'd been fooled by her? Richard didn't confront Carol that day. He was too analytical for that, too careful. He needed to know the truth first, needed to understand what he was really dealing with. So he began watching differently, listening differently, paying attention to the things Carol said about her family, and wondering what the other side of those stories might sound like. He needed to know the truth before he made any decisions about their future. And at that dinner table, everything fell apart. I didn't know that Richard Morrison was the kind of man who investigated problems the way other people solved puzzles methodically and thoroughly, leaving no piece unexamined. I didn't know he'd called a private investigator 2 days after his assistant mentioned Carol's name. Richard used the same investigator his company employed for pre-employment background checks, a former FBI analyst named Marcus Chen, who specialized in financial forensics. The call wasn't about invading Carol's privacy maliciously, it was about due diligence. Richard was considering proposing marriage after the holidays, and he approached major life decisions the same way he approached business partnerships. He needed to know who he was really dealing with. Standard financial background check, Richard had told Marcus. Credit report employment verification spending patterns over the last 5 years. The kind of review we'd do before bringing on a senior partner. Marcus had the report ready within a week. Richard opened the file in his office after everyone had gone home, and the first page made his stomach drop. Carol was $45,000 in debt, $28,000 on 3 different credit cards, all with interest rates above 20%, $12,000 in back rent on the luxury 2-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District that she'd insisted on keeping, even though she spent most nights at Richard's house. "We need to maintain appearances," she'd told him when he'd suggested she move in and save money. "What would people think if I gave up my independence?" $5,000 in various personal loans from acquaintances documented through Venmo and Cash App transactions that Marcus had somehow traced. The spending patterns told a story Richard had been blind to. Over the past year alone, Carol had spent over $60,000 on a salary that topped out at $75,000. Designer handbags from Nordstrom, dinner at expensive restaurants 3 to 4 times a week, even when she wasn't with Richard. Regular spa treatments, hair appointments at salons that charged $200 for highlights. Weekend trips to wine country and the coast. She'd been living a lifestyle she couldn't remotely afford, and Richard in his comfortable financial stability hadn't noticed because she'd hidden it behind a facade of independence. But it was page 4 of the report that made Richard's hands go cold. Marcus had traced a specific transaction from 5 years ago, the time period Carol had mentioned receiving money from her sister for the wedding. The wire transfer was right there in black and white. $30,000 from Linda M. Kinsley to Carol A. Kinsley. Memo line: loan for wedding, will repay. Loan, will repay. Carol's own words documented in the bank transfer that couldn't be erased or reinterpreted. Marcus had followed the money trail from there, and what he'd found was damning. Of the $30,000 Carol received, only about $12,000 had actually gone toward wedding expenses. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer. The rest had been spent over the following 4 months on things that had nothing to do with a wedding. $8,000 for a 2-week vacation to Bali, charged to Carol's credit card 6 weeks after the wedding and labeled in her social media posts as a honeymoon extension. $4,000 at a high-end furniture store, purchasing items that had gone directly into a storage unit when Carol's marriage had fallen apart 2 years later. $3,000 at boutiques in Portland and Seattle, buying clothes Carol had worn once and then donated. $3,000 transferred to something called CK Consulting, which Marcus noted was a failed attempt Carol had made to start a lifestyle coaching business that folded after 4 months. Linda's life savings had been spent on luxury and vanity, and a business venture that went nowhere, while Linda herself had been told year after year that Carol was still getting settled and would pay her back soon. Richard flipped to the final section of the report, the timeline Marcus had constructed. 2 weeks before Linda's house fire, Linda had sent Carol a text message. Marcus had obtained it through methods Richard didn't ask about and probably didn't want to know. "Hi, Carol. I hate to bring this up, but I'm in a tough spot financially and really need to start getting repayment on that wedding loan. Even partial payments would help. Can we make a plan?" Carol had read the message. The read receipt was time-stamped. She'd never responded. 1 week later, Linda's house burned down. Carol's response in the family group chat was documented in the viral screenshot, "That's what hotels are for, Linda." 3 days after that, according to Marcus's investigation, someone had contacted Linda's HR department with concerns about Linda's emotional stability. The call had come from a blocked number, but the timing was unmistakable. The language in the HR email matched phrases Carol had used to describe Linda to Richard over the months they'd dated. Emotionally unstable. Creates drama. Uses situations for sympathy. Richard sat at his desk staring at the report and felt the careful life he'd built start to crack. Carol hadn't just failed to repay her sister. She'd stolen from her, spent the money on frivolous luxuries. And then when Linda had dared to ask for repayment, Carol had systematically destroyed her sister's credibility to ensure Linda couldn't fight back. When Linda's house burned and she had nowhere to go, Carol had seen it as an opportunity. A chance to position Linda as unstable and desperate so that no one would believe her if she pursued the loan. The cruelty wasn't passive. It was calculated, strategic, designed to protect Carol's image and lifestyle at the expense of her sister's survival. Richard closed the file and sat in the silence of his office. He'd built his reputation on integrity and character judgment. He'd prided himself on surrounding himself with good people, ethical people, people whose word meant something. And he'd been dating a woman who'd abandoned her sister in crisis, stolen her life savings, and then weaponized her workplace to silence her. Richard looked at the report one more time and knew with absolute certainty he was about to marry a lie. I had no way of knowing that Richard Morrison was sitting across from my sister at their favorite restaurant that same evening, a place called Meridian that overlooked the river and charged $40 for an appetizer. Carol had told me about it once years ago, casually mentioning it the way she mentioned all the expensive places in her life, making sure I knew the life she was living was several tiers above mine. Richard had chosen the location deliberately. It was where Carol felt most comfortable, most confident, surrounded by the kind of luxury that made her believe she belonged in his world. She'd arrived dressed in a black cocktail dress he'd never seen before, her hair professionally styled, her makeup perfect. She'd kissed him on the cheek and slid into the booth across from him, smiling, completely unaware that everything was about to fall apart. "How was your day?" she'd asked, reaching for the wine menu. Richard had ordered for both of them, making small talk through the appetizers, watching Carol relax into the evening. Then, as their main courses arrived, he'd set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Carol, tell me again about your sister and the fire situation." Carol had launched into the story she'd been telling for weeks, her voice taking on that tone of patient exasperation she used when discussing Linda. "Oh, you saw that ridiculous viral video. Linda has always been so dramatic, Richard. She's making it seem like we abandoned her. But the truth is, we've helped her countless times over the years, and she never appreciates it. She acts like we owe her something. This fire is just another example of her poor choices. She refused to invest in maintaining that old house, and now she's using the tragedy for sympathy and attention. It's exhausting, honestly." Richard had watched her face as she talked, looking for remorse, for awareness, for any flicker of recognition that what she'd done was cruel. There was nothing, just smooth, practiced confidence. "Did you send an email to Linda's HR department?" He'd asked, his voice level and calm. For just a second, Carol's face had flashed with something that looked like panic. Then she'd recovered her expression, shifting to confused innocence. "What? No, Richard, why would I do that? Where is this coming from?" She'd answered too quickly, too defensively. Richard knew interrogation techniques from years of business negotiations. He knew what guilt looked like. "Did you tell Linda's workplace that she's emotionally unstable?" Carol had shifted in her seat, her hands moving to her wine glass. "Richard, if her work reached out to family for context, which I'm not saying they did, wouldn't it be more wrong to lie?" Linda has always had issues with emotional regulation. I was put in a difficult position. I had to tell the truth. Richard had reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out printed pages from Marcus's report. He'd slid the bank statement across the table, the one showing the wire transfer of $30,000 with the memo, "Loan for wedding, will repay." You borrowed $30,000 from Linda for your wedding 5 years ago. Where is it?" Carol's face had gone white. Actually white, all the carefully applied makeup suddenly stark against skin drained of color. That was for the wedding. It went to expenses. Richard, this is private family business." He'd slid another page across. The spending breakdown. $8,000 for Bali, $4,000 for furniture, $3,000 for boutique shopping, $3,000 for a failed business venture. This shows you spent $18,000 on personal luxury items that had nothing to do with your wedding. You didn't borrow money for a wedding, Carol. You used your sister's life savings as your personal fund while she worked and saved and lived modestly. And then when she asked for it back, you told her workplace she was unstable. Carol had started to speak, to explain, to make excuses, but Richard had held up his hand. "I've built my entire reputation on integrity," he'd said, his voice quiet but harder than steel. "I surround myself with people of character, people whose word means something. You've lied to me about your sister. You've lied about your finances. You've lied about who you are as a person. This relationship is over." He'd reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. The engagement ring he'd bought 2 weeks ago, a $15,000 diamond he'd planned to give her on Christmas Eve. He'd put it back in his pocket. "I'll have my assistant contact you about retrieving the items you've left at my house. Don't contact me again." Carol's face had crumbled. People at nearby tables were glancing over, sensing the tension, watching this beautifully dressed woman's face collapse. She'd reached for his hand across the table. "Richard, please, I can explain all of this. It's not what it looks like. Linda has always twisted things to make herself the victim. Please just let me explain." Richard had placed $200 on the table for the meal they'd barely touched, and looked down at her one last time. "I don't partner with people who abandon family in crisis and weaponize workplaces to silence them. We're done. Don't contact me again. Me." He'd walked out of Meridian with his head high, leaving Carol sitting alone at the table, crying in front of the other diners, her perfect image shattered in the exact kind of public place where image mattered most to her. My mother's call came at 2 a.m. full of fury. The phone call that shattered what little sleep I was getting came at 2:17 in the morning. I jolted awake in the motel bed, disoriented, my heart pounding from the sudden noise in the dark room. Mom's name flashed on my screen. For a split second, I thought maybe something was wrong. Maybe someone was hurt. Maybe this was the call where she'd finally realize what she'd done to me. I answered with a groggy, "Hello?" and Mom started screaming before I'd even finished the word. "What did you do? Do you have any idea what you've done to your sister? Carol just called me sobbing, absolutely hysterical. Richard broke up with her because of you and your lies. You deliberately went public with your twisted, exaggerated version of events to sabotage her relationship. I know exactly what you did, Linda. You wanted to ruin her life because you've always been jealous of her success, her happiness, everything she has that you don't." I sat up in bed, trying to make sense of what I was hearing through the fog of interrupted sleep. "Mom, I didn't mention any names in the video. I never said, oh, don't you dare lie to me. Richard saw that video and those text messages and he ended their relationship. He was going to propose Linda. Do you understand what you've taken from your sister? Carol was going to marry into one of the most successful families in this state. She would have been set for life. She would have had everything she's worked for. And you destroyed it because you're bitter and alone and you can't stand to see her happy." The cruelty of it hit me like cold water. I was living in a $49 motel room, had just been forced out of my job, had lost everything I owned in a fire, and my mother was screaming at me about ruining Carol's chance at financial security through marriage. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. "I lost my house," I said quietly. "I asked for help, and you told me to get a motel. Carol owes me $30,000 and refused to let me sleep on her couch for one night. Those are facts, not lies." "You are so selfish." Mom's voice went higher, sharper. "Everything is always about you and what you need and what you're owed. Carol used that money to build her life, to create opportunities to invest in her future. And you've spent 5 years throwing it in her face like some kind of loan shark. Now you've poisoned the best thing that ever happened to her, and for what?" So you can play the victim. So you can get sympathy from strangers on the internet. The line went dead. Mom had hung up on me for the second time in 2 weeks. I lay back down in the dark motel room staring at the water-stained ceiling and felt nothing. Not hurt, not anger. Just a strange cold emptiness where my family used to be. When I woke up the next morning, my phone showed 17 text messages from Carol, all sent between 3 and 6 a.m. I read through them in chronological order, watching my sister's emotional breakdown play out in real time. The first few had crying emojis. "How could you do this to me? I'm your sister. We're supposed to support each other." Then the tone shifted to accusation. "You deliberately told that story publicly so Richard would see it. You wanted to ruin my relationship. You're vindictive and cruel, and I never realized how much you hated me until now." By message 10, Carol was making demands. "You need to post a public apology saying you exaggerated everything. You need to tell Richard you made it all up, that our family did help you, and you're just dramatic. You need to fix this, Linda. If you don't fix this, I will never forgive you." The final messages sent at 5:43 a.m. were threats. "You've made an enemy of the wrong person. You have no idea what I'm capable of when someone crosses me. You're going to regret going public with private family business. You're going to regret everything." I read them all with a detachment that surprised me. Carol wasn't sorry. Not about the $30,000 she'd spent on vacations and furniture. Not about refusing to help me when my house burned. Not about the email she'd sent to my HR department. She was only upset that her actions had consequences. She was only angry that Richard had found out who she really was. Over the next 3 days, the family's response became coordinated in a way that would have been impressive if it weren't so calculated. Dad sent a text that was clearly dictated by Mom. "Your mother and sister are very hurt by your actions. Until you make this right and apologize for the damage you've caused, please don't contact us." Cousins who'd seen the viral video and knew every word of it was true suddenly stopped responding to my messages. Aunt Susan, who'd always been kind to me, sent a brief text. "I think it's best if we give everyone some space right now." Even the family group chat was deleted, replaced with a new one I wasn't added to. Mom changed her voicemail message. I called once just to see and heard her voice. "You've reached Margaret Kinsley. Please leave a message and I'll return your call. If this is Linda, I'm not available." The family had collectively decided I was the villain, and they were committed to that narrative because the alternative was unbearable for them. Admitting they'd treated me monstrously, admitting Carol was selfish and cruel, admitting they'd failed me my entire life would shatter the image they'd built of themselves as a good family. It was easier to make me the problem. I sat in that motel room and realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't fighting for their love anymore. I wasn't trying to earn a place in their hearts or make them see my value. I was done. Now I was just going to make sure I got what was legally mine. But someone wasn't done with the truth. 3 days after the family closed ranks against me, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers had started to mean journalists wanting to interview me about the viral video, or strangers who'd tracked down my contact information to share their own family trauma stories. I was tired of talking, tired of explaining, tired of reliving my rejection over and over. But something made me answer. Maybe just the desperate hope that someone somewhere had good news for me. "Ms. Linda, this is Richard Morrison. I was dating your sister, Carol." My first instinct was to hang up immediately. Carol's boyfriend calling me could only mean one thing: he was calling to defend her, to tell me I'd ruined her life, to add one more voice to the chorus telling me I was the villain. My finger moved toward the end call button. "I owe you an apology," Richard said quickly, as if he knew I was about to disconnect. "I've been hearing only Carol's version of events for the past 6 months, and I now know it was all lies. I'm calling to say I'm sorry for not seeing the truth sooner, and to ask if there's anything I can do to help you rebuild." I sat down on the edge of the motel bed, my legs suddenly unsteady. "I'm sorry, what?" I had a private investigator look into the financial history between you and Carol. Richard said, his voice calm and professional. I know about the $30,000 loan. I know Carol spent most of it on personal luxuries instead of her wedding. I know she's been actively working to prevent you from collecting what you're owed, including contacting your workplace to damage your credibility. What she did isn't just cruel, Ms. Linda. It's potentially illegal. No one from Carol's world had ever apologized to me. No one had ever acknowledged that I'd been wronged. I couldn't speak for a moment. Couldn't process that this man I'd never met was saying the words I'd been waiting my entire family to say. I reviewed your employment file, Richard continued. You've been an exceptional employee for 12 years. The HR action taken against you was based on false information that I believe Carol provided. I'd like to offer you a position in my division, and I'd like our company's legal team to help you pursue what you're owed from Carol. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would you help me? There was a pause, and when Richard spoke again, his voice had a different quality. Softer, more personal. My mother went through something similar with her sister when I was young. Her sister borrowed money, never paid it back, and turned the family against my mother when she asked for repayment. My mother never fought back. She was too afraid of being seen as vindictive or money-hungry. She carried that pain her whole life, and I watched it eat away at her self-worth for decades. I won't watch that happen to someone else when I have the resources to help. I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten for the first time since Mom's screaming phone call. This feels too good to be true. I understand your skepticism, Richard said. I'm going to email you documentation about our Employee Assistance Fund. It's a legitimate company program, not charity. I'd like to meet with you in person with a company HR representative present, so everything is official and above board. You don't have to decide anything right now. Take time to think about it. But Linda, you were wronged by your family and by your workplace. You deserve to have someone fight for you for once, instead of always fighting alone. Someone fight for you. Those 5 words broke something open in my chest. I'd spent 38 years fighting alone, being told I was strong enough to handle everything myself, being positioned as the independent one who didn't need help. And here was someone with actual power and resources offering to stand beside me, not out of pity, but out of a sense of justice. Why did you have an investigator look into this? I asked, needing to understand. You barely know me. Because I was considering marrying Carol, Richard said bluntly. I do thorough background checks before major life decisions. What I found was disturbing enough that I ended our relationship immediately. Then I realized you were still suffering the consequences of her lies, and I had the power to help correct that. So I'm choosing to use that power. I looked around the motel room that had been my home for 3 weeks, at the peeling wallpaper and the stained carpet and the rattling heater, at the life I'd been reduced to while my family told everyone I was dramatic and vindictive. I accept, I heard myself say. I accept your help. Good, Richard said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I'll have my assistant contact you tomorrow to set up a meeting. And Linda, you're going to get through this. You're going to be okay. After we hung up, I sat in that motel room and cried. Not from sadness or grief, but from the overwhelming relief of finally having someone believe me. Someone see me. Someone willing to fight beside me instead of leaving me to fight alone. But accepting meant stepping into a future I never expected. 2 weeks after Richard's call, I walked into the office building on a Monday morning, but not to the 4th floor where I'd spent 12 years becoming invisible. This time I rode the elevator to the 15th floor to Richard's division wearing a charcoal gray suit I'd purchased with the advance from my new position. The fabric felt substantial, professional, nothing like the discount store clothes I'd worn to that humiliating HR meeting. I stood differently in this suit, straighter, more solid. The elevator stopped on the 7th floor, and 2 people got on. I recognized them immediately. Jennifer and Michael, the HR representatives who'd pushed me into voluntary leave. They saw me, and their faces went through a visible sequence of confusion, discomfort, and something that looked like concern. I nodded politely, said nothing, and watched the numbers climb. When the elevator reached 15 and the doors opened, I stepped out without looking back. I didn't owe them explanations. I didn't owe them anything. Richard's assistant Sarah met me in the reception area and walked me to a conference room where my new team was gathering for the morning meeting. "Everyone's excited to have you," she said warmly. "Richard spoke very highly of your track record." In the conference room, Richard introduced me as the new project manager for client relations, a position that was actually a step up from what I'd been doing before. My new colleagues knew nothing about the fire, the family situation, the viral video. I was starting with a completely clean slate judged only on my qualifications and what I could contribute going forward. When Richard asked me to present my background and experience to the team, I stood and spoke clearly about my 12 years with the company, the projects I'd managed, the systems I'd implemented. People listened, actually listened, leaning forward, taking notes, asking thoughtful questions. After the meeting, a woman named Jennifer Chen approached me. "I heard you've been with the company for 12 years, she said. "It's great they're finally recognizing talent and moving people up. Welcome to the team." Finally recognizing talent. The words stayed with me all day. I'd been undervalued for over a decade, kept in the same role with minimal raises, my suggestions politely noted and quietly ignored. I'd thought it was normal. I'd thought I needed to be grateful for stability. Richard personally oversaw my transition, but in a way that was clearly professional and appropriate. He assigned me a mentor, Maria, a senior project manager who'd been with the division for 8 years. She took me through the onboarding process, introduced me to key clients, included me in strategy meetings where my input was actually requested and valued. During one meeting, when I suggested a streamlined approach to a logistics problem, the room went quiet for a moment, and then the director said, "That's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Let's implement that." No one had ever called my thinking innovative before. Competent, maybe. Reliable, certainly. But never innovative. The following week, Richard enrolled me in a leadership development training program. "You have over a decade of experience," he said. "It's time you were prepared for senior positions." My previous supervisor had never once suggested leadership training despite my tenure and consistently high performance reviews. In one of the training sessions, the instructor, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a direct manner, said something that made me sit up straighter in my chair. Many of us, especially women, are taught to minimize our needs and maximize our utility to others. We're rewarded for being low maintenance, for not asking for raises or promotions, for supporting others' success instead of pursuing our own. Unlearning that conditioning is what leadership requires. I felt like she was speaking directly to me, describing my entire life in 3 sentences. The sister who gave away her life savings, the daughter who never asked for help, the employee who stayed in the same position for 12 years without pushing for advancement. I'd been taught that my value came from being useful, stable, easy. My life began to stabilize in small ways that felt monumental after weeks of crisis. With my new salary 20% higher than my old position, I could afford to move out of the motel into a short-term furnished apartment. It wasn't permanent, but it had a real kitchen, a comfortable bed, windows that let in actual sunlight. I bought clothes that fit properly. I replaced my burned laptop. I opened a new savings account and watched the first deposit appear, determined to rebuild what I'd lost. The insurance company finally processed my claim. The check was smaller than I'd hoped. The house hadn't been insured for full replacement value, and depreciation ate into everything. But it was something, a foundation to build on. Still, every time I felt stable, every time I started to relax into this new normal, I'd think about the $30,000. Carol had spent it on vacations and furniture while I'd scraped by. She'd refused to help me when my house burned while living in a luxury apartment she couldn't afford. She'd attacked my job to protect herself from repayment. Stability wasn't justice. Stability was just the platform I needed to fight for what was actually mine. Then came the letter from the insurance company. The letter from the insurance company had been routine final documentation of the claim, a breakdown of the payout instructions for future correspondence. But it had required me to update all my contact information, which meant dealing with my phone number that had been tied to dozens of accounts I'd now lost access to. 6 weeks after the fire, I sat in my new apartment with my old phone and a new one side by side, methodically transferring data and updating account information. Part of the process meant going through old voicemails before the transfer would complete. I'd been putting it off because I knew there would be messages from before the fire from when my life was normal, and I wasn't sure I could handle the emotional weight of hearing my own voice from that time saying things like, "I'll be home by 6," or "I'll call you back after dinner." Messages from a version of myself who still had a home to go back to. Most of the saved voicemails were exactly what I expected. Appointment reminders from my dentist. Delivery notifications about packages that had probably burned on my front porch. A message from my car insurance about my renewal rate. I was deleting them one by one when I reached one from 11 months ago that I'd apparently saved but couldn't remember why. I pressed play and heard my mother's voice. "Carol, honey, it's Mom. I just got off the phone with Linda. She's asking about that wedding money again. Listen, don't worry about it. Linda makes good money, she lives alone, she doesn't have expensive taste. She'll be fine. You need that money more than she does right now. Just keep putting her off. If she gets pushy, we'll deal with it together. You're building a life, and she's already established. Let her be the stable one for once, that's what she's good at. Love you." I sat frozen on my couch, the phone pressed to my ear as the voicemail ended, and the automated voice asked if I wanted to save or delete the message. Mom had called my number by mistake, meaning to call Carol. I'd saved it 11 months ago, probably confused about why Mom was leaving a message clearly meant for my sister, and then forgotten about it in the daily chaos of work and life. I played it again, and then a third time. Let her be the stable one for once, that's what she's good at. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't just favoritism. This wasn't unconscious bias or one child being slightly preferred over another. This was my mother actively strategizing with Carol about how to keep my money, how to avoid repayment, how to position me as the person who didn't need things because being responsible and self-sufficient meant I deserved to be used. She'll be fine. A dismissal of $30,000, my entire life savings at the time, as if it were pocket change. As if my financial security didn't matter because I was good at managing money, so clearly I didn't need the money I'd managed to save. But the phrase that destroyed me was, "We'll deal with it together." Mom and Carol had discussed my request for repayment and made a joint decision to ignore it, to gaslight me, to keep putting me off. This wasn't Carol acting alone while Mom stayed neutral. Mom was an active participant in the plan to keep what was mine. And months after this voicemail, when I'd mentioned the $30,000 on the phone after my house burned down, Mom had screamed at me for being selfish and manipulative for bringing up old money during a crisis. She'd rewritten history, turned the loan into a gift, made me the villain for wanting back what I was owed. The gaslighting had been deliberate and coordinated. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. I labeled it Evidence, and began working methodically the way I'd learned to work on complex projects at my job. I downloaded the voicemail and saved it in 3 different locations: my laptop, an external drive, and a cloud storage account. I went through my text messages and screenshot every conversation with Carol about the loan, starting with her message from 5 years ago. "Thank you so much for the loan, sis. I'll pay you back as soon as we're settled. I promise." The word loan was right there in her own text. The promise was documented. I logged into my bank account and found the original wire transfer from 5 years ago. $30,000 sent to Carol A. Kinsley. Memo line, "Loan for wedding, will repay." I saved the bank statement as a PDF. I screenshot the group chat messages from the night of the fire. "That's what hotels are for, Linda." Mom's message about Carol's sleep being more important than my crisis. Dad's thumbs up emoji. All of it preserved and dated. I saved the HR email that had forced me into voluntary leave, the one that had used Carol's exact language to describe me as emotionally unstable and dramatic. I organized everything chronologically in the folder. The loan 5 years ago. Years of Carol avoiding repayment. My requests for the money back. The voicemail showing Mom and Carol's coordination. The fire. The rejection. The HR attack. The timeline told a story that was undeniable. Carol had borrowed money with no intention of repaying it, and when I'd finally asked for it back, she'd systematically tried to destroy my credibility. Looking at that folder at years of documented betrayal and manipulation, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't about family anymore. Family didn't do this to each other. This was about justice, about accountability, about making sure that people who hurt you didn't get away with it just because you shared DNA. And then Linda found something that went back even further. The insurance company needed documentation of valuable items I'd lost in the fire, which meant reconstructing a life from paper trails and faded receipts. Most of my important documents had burned, but years ago, I'd stored boxes of old tax returns and financial records in my friend Amy's garage when I was decluttering. I'd forgotten about them until the insurance adjuster asked for proof of the furniture and electronics I'd claimed. Amy helped me carry 3 dusty boxes from her garage to my apartment. We spent an afternoon going through folders labeled by year, pulling out receipts for the couch I'd bought in 2018, the laptop from 2020, the kitchen renovation from 2022. It was strange seeing my life reduced to purchase orders and bank statements, proof that I'd owned things that no longer existed. In the bottom of the second box, I found a folder labeled 2005 taxes in my younger handwriting. I almost set it aside. 20-year-old tax returns wouldn't help with the current insurance claim, but something made me open it. Inside were bank statements from July and August of 2005, back when I was 25 years old, and banks still mailed paper statements every month. The July statement showed a withdrawal of $8,000 on the 15th. The memo line read, "Mom, emergency loan, will repay." I stared at it, and a memory I'd completely buried came flooding back with perfect, painful clarity. I'd been at my first real job a year out of college, living in a tiny studio apartment, and feeling proud that I'd managed to save $8,000. It wasn't much, but it was mine, built from careful budgeting and eating more ramen than any human should consume. Then Mom had called, and her voice had been frantic in a way I'd never heard before. "Linda, honey, I need your help. Dad needs emergency surgery, and we're $8,000 short of what insurance will cover. We've called everyone, but you're the only one with any savings right now. I know it's your whole emergency fund, but this is your father's life. We'll pay you back as soon as the insurance reimbursement comes through, I promise." I'd transferred the money that same day, walking to the bank on my lunch break and authorizing the withdrawal with shaking hands. Emergency surgery, Dad's life. Of course I'd given it. What kind of daughter would I be if I didn't? But as I sat in my apartment holding that bank statement, another memory surfaced, one I'd never connected to the loan before. Carol's graduation party. It had been that same summer, late July or early August. Mom had rented a venue, not just someone's backyard, but an actual event space with white tablecloths and a small stage. There had been catered food, a live band, a professional photographer. I remembered thinking it seemed excessive, especially for a family that had just faced a medical emergency, but Mom had waved off my concern. "We wanted to celebrate Carol properly. She graduated summa cum laude from one of the best schools in the state. This is a once-in-a-lifetime achievement." I'd gone to that party eating grocery store brand crackers for lunch because I was trying to rebuild my emergency fund from zero. Carol had worn a designer dress I'd never seen before. The cake alone must have cost $300. Now, sitting in my apartment 20 years later, I pulled out my phone and searched my memory for Dad's surgery in 2005. I remembered him having a minor outpatient procedure in 2006, something with his knee that required physical therapy but wasn't serious. But in 2005, he'd been fine, completely healthy. There had been no emergency surgery. Mom had lied to get my savings for Carol's graduation party. My hands were shaking as I opened my laptop calculator. $8,000 in 2005, $30,000 in 2019, $38,000 total that my family had taken from me under false pretenses over the course of my adult life. This wasn't 2 separate incidents. This was a pattern, a systematic draining of my resources whenever I achieved any financial stability. I'd been 25 and naive enough to believe my mother when she said it was an emergency. I'd been 33 and optimistic enough to believe Carol when she said she'd repay the wedding loan. Both times I'd been told it was temporary. Both times I'd been promised repayment. Both times the money had gone to Carol's celebration, Carol's image, Carol's life. And when I'd needed help, when my car broke down in 2008 and I'd asked Mom for a small loan to cover the repairs, she'd said they were tapped out financially. When I'd wanted help with a down payment for my house in 2012, Dad had said, "You're so good with money, Linda. You don't need help the way Carol does." Carol's needs were always emergencies requiring my immediate sacrifice. My needs were character-building experiences I should handle alone, because I was the strong one. I added the 2005 bank statement to my evidence folder and sat staring at the screen. $38,000. 2 decades of being used as a resource for my sister while being told I didn't need or deserve the same support. A lifetime of being positioned as the one who gives, while Carol was positioned as the one who receives. The voicemail, the bank transfers, the text messages, the group chat rejection, the HR sabotage, and now this 20 years of documented financial exploitation. I wasn't imagining the pattern. I wasn't being dramatic or vindictive. I was looking at proof that my family had been systematically taking from me my entire adult life. And Linda knew exactly what to do with this evidence. Richard connected me with Thomas Chen the day after I showed him the evidence folder. Thomas was a litigation attorney in his mid-50s who specialized in contract disputes and what he called family financial fraud cases, where relatives exploited each other financially and then hid behind the shield of family loyalty to avoid accountability. His office was downtown on the 10th floor of a glass building with a view of the river. I sat across from him at a polished conference table, my laptop open with the evidence folder displayed on the screen, and watched him review everything with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen every variation of human cruelty and dishonesty. He read Carol's text messages promising repayment. He studied the bank transfer showing $30,000 with the memo, "Loan for wedding will repay." He listened to the voicemail of Mom strategizing with Carol about avoiding repayment, his expression darkening. He examined the 2005 bank statement showing the $8,000 emergency loan that had actually funded Carol's graduation party. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at me with an expression that was part sympathy and part professional assessment. "Ms. Linda, what was done to you is unconscionable. It's systematic financial exploitation disguised as family obligation." "Can I sue for the 2005 money too?" I asked. Thomas shook his head. "That debt is past the statute of limitations. In this state, you have 6 years to pursue collection on a debt. The 2005 loan is 20 years old. We can't sue for it directly. But we can use it to establish a pattern of behavior. We can show a jury that this isn't a one-time misunderstanding, but a decades-long pattern of your family taking your money under false pretenses." He pulled out a legal pad and started writing numbers. "Here's what we're looking at. The $30,000 loan is documented with Carol's own text message calling it a loan and promising repayment. That's a verbal contract with written confirmation. This isn't a family gift dispute. This is breach of contract, and we can win." He wrote out the calculation. "We'll sue for the original $30,000 plus interest at 7% annually for 5 years, which adds $10,500. We'll also pursue damages for emotional distress caused by Carol's coordinated attack on you, the HR email that got you pushed out of work, the damage to your professional reputation, the housing crisis you faced when she refused to help after the fire. Additionally, we'll include a defamation claim for the false statements she made to your employer." Thomas looked up from his notes. "If we present this to a jury, especially the voicemail showing your mother and sister strategizing to avoid repayment and the timeline of Carol attacking your job right after you requested the money, they'll see this as retaliation and cruelty. Juries don't like bullies, and they especially don't like people who exploit family bonds for financial gain." "How much total?" I asked. "We can pursue $75,000, $30,000 principal, $10,500 in interest, and the remainder in damages for emotional distress and defamation. The number took my breath away, not because it was large, but because it represented accountability, real consequences for what Carol had done to me. "What about costs?" I asked. "I can't afford an expensive attorney." "Richard's company has an employee legal assistance fund," Thomas said. "It's a legitimate program designed to help employees who've been treated unjustly. You qualify. My fees will be covered by that fund." "This isn't charity, Linda. You were wronged, you're a valued company employee, and you deserve protection." Before I could respond, Thomas leaned forward. "But I need you to understand what you're choosing. This lawsuit will become public record. Your family will hire their own attorney and likely portray you as vindictive and money-hungry. They'll tell anyone who will listen that you're tearing the family apart over money. It will be stressful and painful. Court cases take months, sometimes over a year. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the motel room with its cigarette-burned nightstand and rattling heater. I thought about the group chat messages telling me to sleep in a hotel while my house smoldered. I thought about the voicemail where Mom casually dismissed $30,000 of my savings because I was good at being stable. I thought about 20 years of being positioned as the resource while Carol was positioned as the priority. I looked Thomas in the eye. "I've spent my whole life trying not to make waves, trying to be the easy one who doesn't need anything. That got me rejected when my house burned down and sabotaged at my workplace. I'm done protecting people who hurt me. File the lawsuit." Thomas nodded slowly, a small smile crossing his face. He extended his hand across the table. "Then let's get you justice." I shook his hand and felt something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Not hope exactly, but something harder and more solid. Power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for permission or apologizing for taking up space. I was demanding what was mine, and I had the resources and evidence to back it up. And when the legal notice arrived, Carol's world shattered again. Thomas filed the lawsuit on a Monday. The process server delivered it to Carol's apartment the following Tuesday morning at 9:47, according to the delivery confirmation Thomas forwarded to me later that day. I imagined Carol answering the door in her usual morning routine, probably wearing expensive loungewear, maybe holding her second cup of coffee, expecting a package from one of the online boutiques she couldn't afford but ordered from anyway. She would have signed for the manila envelope without thinking. Maybe she'd even smiled at the process server, thanked them pleasantly. Then she would have opened it and seen the words in bold letters across the top of the first page, "Summons to Civil Court." I didn't have to imagine what happened next, because Carol called Mom exactly 11 minutes after the delivery was confirmed, and Mom left me a voicemail 30 seconds after that. I had her blocked, but voicemails still came through to a separate folder on my phone. I listened to it once, standing in my apartment kitchen with my morning tea cooling on the counter. "Linda, this is your mother." Her voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but suing your sister is absolutely unacceptable. This is family business. You're making it public, you're making it legal, and you're going to tear this family apart over money." Carol is devastated. She can barely breathe. "You need to call me back immediately so we can settle this like adults instead of dragging our family through the courts like common criminals." The voicemail ended. I deleted it and went back to my tea. 20 minutes later, a text came through from Dad's number. I'd forgotten to block that one because Dad had barely used his phone in years. The message was clearly from Mom. "This lawsuit is embarrassing the entire family. Everyone will know. Carol doesn't have $75,000. You're going to ruin her over a misunderstanding from years ago. This is vindictive and cruel. Please drop this and we can work something out privately. Don't destroy your sister over money. Don't destroy this family." I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Thomas without responding. He called me 15 minutes later. "These messages are actually helpful to our case," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "They show consciousness of guilt and an attempt to interfere with legal proceedings. Your mother isn't denying that Carol owes you money, she's just upset that there are consequences. Keep forwarding me anything they send." Over the next 3 days, my phone became a chronicle of my family's desperation. Mom called 6 more times, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. Dad sent 2 more texts, both clearly dictated by Mom. Aunt Susan messaged asking if we could talk this through as a family. Even Carol's ex-husband, someone I hadn't heard from in 3 years, sent a LinkedIn message suggesting I was going too far. Every message was the same underneath the varying tones. They wanted me to stop. They wanted me to be quiet. They wanted me to go back to being the Linda who absorbed hurt and unfairness without complaint, who put family harmony above her own needs, who could always be counted on to fold under pressure. But I wasn't that Linda anymore. On Thursday evening, Carol herself texted from a number I didn't recognize. "Please, Linda, I'm begging you, can we talk about this? I know I made mistakes, but suing me isn't the answer. We're sisters. Family should work things out privately. Please just talk to me." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me, the old part, the part that had been trained for 38 years to prioritize Carol's feelings, wanted to respond, wanted to explain, wanted to make her understand that this wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. But I knew better now. Carol didn't want to understand. She wanted me to back down. She wanted me to absorb the loss and the betrayal and carry on as if nothing had happened the way I'd always done before. I typed out my response carefully, one sentence that Thomas had helped me compose days ago in preparation for exactly this moment. All communication should go through my attorney, Thomas Chen, at Mitchell & Associates. I hit send, and then blocked the number. Then I opened my contacts, found Carol's original number, and blocked that too. I blocked Aunt Susan. I blocked the few cousins who'd sent tentative, "Are you sure about this?" messages. I blocked everyone connected to my family except Dad's number, which I kept unblocked solely so I could forward Mom's messages to Thomas. For the first time in my life, I had something my family couldn't take away or talk me out of. Legal standing. Documented evidence. An attorney who worked for justice instead of family peace. A case file that told an undeniable story of exploitation and betrayal. They'd wanted me to be silent and easy to absorb their cruelty without fighting back to prioritize their comfort over my own survival. Now they would deal with the alternative. But Carol wasn't done trying to destroy me. 2 weeks after Carol received the summons, I was in a meeting with my team when my phone started vibrating with notifications. I ignored it. At first, we were in the middle of reviewing a client proposal, but the vibrations kept coming one after another in rapid succession. During a break, I checked my phone and found 17 messages from colleagues, friends, and even a few acquaintances I hadn't talked to in months. They all said variations of the same thing. "Someone is posting about you on Facebook. You need to see this." I opened the links they'd sent and found myself staring at a post in 3 different local community groups. The account name was Sarah Johnson, clearly fake with a generic profile picture that looked like a stock photo. The post was long, detailed, and vicious. Warning about Linda Kay, who works at Morrison & Associates. This woman is a fraud who manipulated her own family and is now suing her younger sister for money that was a gift for her wedding. Linda is emotionally unstable and has been using her house fire story to scam people for sympathy while pursuing a vindictive lawsuit against family members who tried to help her. She told everyone we abandoned her, but the truth is we offered support and she rejected it to play victim. Be careful if you work with or know this person, she's dangerous and will use any tragedy for personal gain. The post included screenshots of text messages I didn't recognize at first. Then I looked closer and realized they were edited versions of real messages clumsily photoshopped to change the context. A message where Mom had texted, "We can't have you here," had been altered to read, "We want you here." Carol's, "That's what hotels are for," had been changed to, "We can help with a hotel." The edits were obvious if you looked carefully. The fonts didn't quite match, the spacing was off. But at a glance, they looked real enough to be damaging. The post had been up for 3 hours and already had over 200 shares. The comments section was filling with people I didn't know saying things like, "I knew something seemed off about her story," and "People who use tragedies for sympathy are the worst." A few people were defending me, referencing the original viral video, but they were being shouted down. For a moment, I felt the old panic rising. The fear of being labeled unstable, of having my credibility destroyed, of losing everything I'd just started to rebuild. Then, I remembered Thomas's words. Every attempt they make to stop you just creates more evidence. I screenshot everything, the posts, the comments, the fake screenshots, and forwarded it all to Thomas and Richard with a message. Carol just posted this in multiple community groups. Richard called me within 10 minutes. I saw it. Don't respond, don't engage, I'm handling this. 20 minutes later, he called back. I've got IT security looking into it. The post mentions the company by name, which makes it a potential security concern. We're treating this as a cyber harassment investigation. I didn't fully understand what that meant until Thomas called an hour later. Richard's IT team is very good at what they do. They've already traced the fake Facebook account to an IP address at your mother's house. They've also discovered that Carol created 4 other fake accounts to comment on her own post, making it look like multiple people agreed with her. She used the same IP address for all of them. So we can prove it was Carol? We can prove it beyond any doubt. IP logs don't lie. And Linda, she edited those screenshots. The IT team pulled the metadata from the images and compared them to the original messages. They can show exactly where and when she altered them. This isn't just defamation anymore. This is evidence tampering and cyber harassment. My hands were shaking. What does that mean for the lawsuit? It means we're amending our filing to include these new charges. It means the damages we're seeking just became a lot more justified. And it means Carol just handed us the best evidence we could have asked for, that she's willing to lie, manipulate, and break the law to avoid accountability. That evening, Richard sent me a detailed report compiled by the IT security team. It included IP address logs showing every post and comment Carol had made from Mom's house. It included the original unedited screenshots alongside Carol's manipulated versions with the alterations highlighted in red. It included timestamps showing that Carol had created 5 fake Facebook accounts within a 30-minute window, all from the same computer, all used to attack me. The report was 15 pages of undeniable evidence that Carol had orchestrated a coordinated defamation campaign against me, complete with fabricated evidence and fake supporter accounts. Thomas filed an emergency motion the next morning to amend our lawsuit to include cyber harassment and defamation charges. He attached the full IT report as evidence. He also sent a cease and desist letter to Carol and Mom, threatening criminal charges if any further defamatory content appeared. The Facebook posts were taken down within hours after being reported with the evidence of manipulation. The community groups where Carol had posted issued statements apologizing for not catching the fake account sooner. Carol's desperate attempt to destroy my credibility had instead given me the strongest evidence yet of her malicious intent. And that's when everything truly fell apart for Carol. The next morning, I arrived at work to find the entire office buzzing with an energy I didn't understand until I checked my email. The first message in my inbox was from Richard Morrison, sent to the entire company at 7:30 a.m. The subject line read, "Addressing false information about our employee." I opened it with my heart pounding and read words I never expected to see. It has come to my attention that false and defamatory information has been posted on social media about one of our valued employees, Linda Kay. Our IT security team has investigated and determined that these posts originated from an individual with a personal vendetta who is currently being sued for breach of contract by our employee. The allegations in these posts are demonstrably false and have been created through manipulated screenshots and fake social media accounts. I want to be clear, Linda is a trusted member of our team with an exemplary 12-year record. Any employee who encounters or shares this defamatory content should report it immediately. We take the protection of our employees seriously and will pursue all available legal remedies against those who attempt to harm our staff through false statements. Richard Morrison, CEO. 347 people received that email. By 9 a.m., everyone in the building knew what had happened. Colleagues I barely knew stopped by my desk to express support. My team lead pulled me aside to say, "We've got your back." Even people from other divisions nodded at me in the hallways with expressions of solidarity. Carol had tried to destroy my reputation company-wide, and instead Richard had used his position to publicly defend me and expose her as a liar. Thomas called me at 10. "I've filed the emergency motion to amend the lawsuit. We're adding defamation and cyber harassment charges. The damages we're seeking have increased to $75,000, $30,000 principal, $10,500 in interest, and the remainder for emotional distress defamation and the coordinated campaign to destroy your professional reputation." "Will it work?" I asked. "Linda, we have a 15-page IT forensics report showing that Carol created 5 fake Facebook accounts from your mother's IP address, all within 30 minutes of each other. We have metadata proving she manipulated screenshots to fabricate evidence. We have timestamps, IP logs, and digital fingerprints that couldn't be clearer if she'd signed her name to the posts. This isn't circumstantial. This is definitive proof of malicious intent." He paused. "I'm also sending a cease and desist letter to Carol and your mother today. It includes everything the IT team found. I want them to know that we have proof that we're not bluffing, and that any further attempts to harass or defame you will result in criminal charges." The cease and desist letter was delivered that afternoon. Thomas forwarded me a copy. It was 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple message: "We know what you did, we can prove it, and if you do anything like this again, you'll face criminal prosecution, in addition to the civil lawsuit." The letter ended with a sentence that made me feel something close to vindication. "Your attempts to silence Ms. Smith through defamation have instead provided additional evidence of malicious intent and will be presented to the court as proof of your willingness to lie, manipulate evidence, and cause harm to avoid accountability." By the end of the day, Carol's fake Facebook posts had been reported and removed from all the community groups. But screenshots had already spread. The IT report that proved Carol had created fake accounts and manipulated evidence started circulating in the same groups where she'd posted her lies. The comments that had initially supported Carol's narrative turned vicious in the opposite direction. This woman borrowed money from her sister, refused to pay it back, and then tried to destroy her sister's reputation with fake evidence. The level of desperation to avoid accountability is disturbing. She sued her own sister and then created fake accounts to make herself look like the victim. Someone found Carol's real Facebook account and the angry messages started flooding in. Carol made her account private within hours, but the damage was done. I didn't take any satisfaction in watching Carol's life fall apart on social media. But I did feel a cold sense of justice when Richard forwarded me a text message he'd sent to Carol that afternoon. "I've reviewed the evidence of your defamation campaign against your sister. The IT report shows a level of deception and malice that confirms ending our relationship was the right decision. I'm grateful I discovered who you really are before making the mistake of marrying you. Do not contact me again. Know that I will testify in court about your character if needed." Carol was living in Mom's spare bedroom. She had no job. She was facing a lawsuit backed by mountains of evidence. She'd just been exposed publicly for creating fake social media accounts and manipulating evidence. And the man she'd hoped to marry had sent her a final message making it clear he found her morally reprehensible. She'd tried one last desperate attack to destroy me, and instead she'd destroyed any remaining credibility she had. But the worst was still ahead. The courtroom. The lawsuit moved through the court system with all the speed of a glacier, which Thomas assured me was completely normal for civil litigation. "Justice takes time," he said during one of our monthly check-ins. "The system is designed to be thorough, not fast." The discovery phase consumed the next 4 months. Both sides were required to exchange evidence to show our cards before we ever entered a courtroom. I provided everything Thomas requested: complete bank records showing the $30,000 transfer with the memo "loan for wedding" will repay every text message exchange with Carol about the money. including her explicit promise to pay me back the voicemail of Mom, strategizing with Carol about avoiding repayment statements from people at the community center support group who'd heard my story and testimony from colleagues about the timing of the HR investigation that coincided with Carol contacting my workplace. Carol's attorney was a man named David Brennan, who Mom had found through someone at her church. Thomas told me quietly that Brennan specialized in real estate closings and had minimal trial experience, which meant Carol's family couldn't afford a real litigator. Brennan sent discovery requests demanding proof that the $30,000 was a loan and not a gift. Thomas responded by providing Carol's own text message enlarged and highlighted, "Thank you so much for the loan, sis. I'll pay you back as soon as we're settled. I promise." The word loan was right there in Carol's own written words. Brennan tried a different angle, arguing that I was exaggerating the emotional harm. Thomas submitted documentation of my 3 weeks living in a motel, the HR email that forced me into unpaid leave, and the timeline showing Carol's attack on my employment came immediately after I'd requested repayment. 6 months after filing, the court required us to attempt mediation. It was standard procedure, Thomas explained, a last chance to settle before the expense and uncertainty of a trial. We met in a conference room at a neutral mediation office. Carol sat across from me for the first time since this all began, looking thin and tired in clothes I didn't recognize. Mom wasn't allowed in the mediation, only the parties to the lawsuit and their attorneys. The mediator, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and patient eyes, explained that most cases settled at this stage. "Carol," the mediator said gently, "are you willing to acknowledge that you owe Linda money and propose a payment plan?" Carol's hands twisted in her lap. "I acknowledge that I received money from Linda, but it was given in the context of family help. The expectation of rigid repayment wasn't clearly established. I thought it was more of an open-ended family loan, not a legal contract." My jaw tightened. Even now, sitting across from me with a lawsuit hanging over her head, Carol couldn't simply say, "I borrowed money and I should have paid it back." Thomas leaned forward. "Your client texted the word loan and the phrase, 'I'll pay you back as soon as we're settled, I promise.' She violated both an explicit agreement and basic human decency." The mediator tried to find middle ground. What if Carol agrees to pay the $30,000 over 5 years with no interest? That would be $600 a month, which might be manageable. I looked at Carol, waiting for her to say something, anything that showed remorse or understanding of what she'd done. She stared at the table. "No," I said clearly. "She doesn't get to avoid consequences just because she's my sister. She attacked my job to prevent me from collecting what I was owed. She created fake social media accounts to destroy my reputation. If she'd simply said, 'I'm sorry I spent your money and I can't repay you after my house burned down,' we wouldn't be here. Instead, she chose cruelty. We're going to trial." The mediation ended 40 minutes after it started. A month before the trial date, Richard asked to meet with Thomas and me. We sat in Thomas's conference room and Richard was direct. "I want to testify. I can speak to Carol's character, the lies she told me about Linda, and the fact that Linda's work performance was exemplary before Carol interfered. Third-party witnesses carry weight with juries." I hesitated. "Richard, this will make everything public. My family will see you as a traitor. It might complicate things for you professionally." He met my eyes steadily. "Linda, I've made my choice. Carol lied to me for 6 months. She portrayed you as a dramatic, jealous sister when the truth was she'd stolen from you and sabotaged your career. I believe in accountability. I want to testify." Thomas nodded. "His testimony will be powerful. He's credible, he's not family, and he's the fiancé Carol lost because of her own behavior. It demonstrates real consequences." I agreed. As the trial date approached November 15th, 11 months after the fire that had started, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and determination. This would be the first time I'd face my entire family in a setting where I had the power, where they couldn't talk over me, or gaslight me, or dismiss my experience. This would be the first time the truth would be spoken in a place where it had to be heard. And 11 months after the fire, I walked into that courtroom. Day 2 began at 9 a.m. sharp. Carol was called to the stand at 9:30, and I watched her walk to the witness box wearing a conservative gray suit that looked borrowed probably from Mom. It hung loose on her frame in a way that suggested she'd lost weight over the past months. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, and I wondered if she even understood what truth meant anymore. Her attorney, David Brennan, started with softball questions designed to make her sympathetic. "Carol, can you describe your relationship with your sister growing up?" "Linda and I have always had a difficult relationship." Carol said, her voice soft and practiced. "She's always been very independent, very focused on herself. I felt like she resented me for needing family support. I kept my face neutral, but inside I felt the familiar burn of being rewritten." Brennan continued. "When Linda gave you money for your wedding, what was your understanding of that transaction?" "I thought it was a gift," Carol said. "I felt pressured to accept it because Mom said Linda wanted to help, but I understood it as family support for an important life event. I never thought there was an expectation of rigid repayment. When Linda started demanding the money back years later, I was shocked and hurt. It was a rehearsed answer delivered with just enough emotion to seem genuine. But then Thomas stood for cross-examination, and everything changed. He approached the witness stand with a printed text message enlarged so the jury could see it clearly on the screen. "Ms. Carroll, I'm showing you a text message you sent to Linda 5 years ago. Can you read the highlighted portion aloud for the jury?" Carol's face went pale. She read in a barely audible voice, "Thank you so much for the loan, sis." "You used the word loan," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. "Did you or did you not text the word loan to your sister?" I might have used that word, but in the context of family, it doesn't mean yes or no. Ms. Carroll, did you text the word loan? A long pause. Yes. Thomas displayed the bank transfer on the screen. And this memo line on the bank transfer which says, "Loan for wedding, will repay." Did you approve that memo line? I don't remember approving it specifically. But you received the money with that memo attached, correct? Yes. Thomas pulled out bank statements next, and I watched Carol's face as he went through them line by line. 2 months after your wedding, you spent $8,000 at a luxury resort in Mexico. 4 months later, $4,000 at high-end furniture stores. Throughout the year, $3,000 at designer boutiques. Ms. Carroll, if this $30,000 was for your wedding, why were you spending it on vacations and furniture months after the wedding was over? Carol stammered something about wedding expenses being more than expected, but her voice had lost its confidence. Thomas's next questions were surgical in their precision. On the night your sister's house burned down, where were you? At home. Was anyone staying in your guest room that night? No. Did you offer your sister your guest room? Carol hesitated. No, I told her it was being renovated. Was your guest room being renovated? Another long pause. No. So you lied to your sister while she had nowhere to sleep after losing everything she owned? Objection argumentative, Brennan said weakly. Sustained, Judge Warren said, but the damage was done. The jury had heard the question and seen Carol's face. Thomas continued. Did you contact anyone at your sister's workplace to express concerns about her emotional stability? I might have mentioned some concerns to a mutual colleague, but Thomas displayed a timeline on the screen. You contacted her workplace 3 days after she sent you a text message asking about loan repayment. That's quite a coincidence, isn't it? Carol had no answer that didn't make her look guilty. By the time she stepped down from the stand, her credibility was in tatters. The jury's expressions had shifted from neutral to something harder, less sympathetic. The afternoon session brought Richard Morrison to the stand, and his testimony was everything Thomas had promised it would be. Richard sat calmly in the witness box, his posture relaxed but his words precise. I dated Carol for 6 months, he testified. During that time, she frequently mentioned her sister Linda, always in negative terms. Linda was dramatic. Linda was jealous. Linda caused problems. She told me Linda had tried to ruin her wedding by making everything about money. She painted a picture of a troubled sister who couldn't be happy for her success. Thomas asked, "When did you learn the truth?" "When I saw the viral video of Linda discussing the fire and her family's response." The story Carol had told me and the reality Linda described were completely opposite. So I had a private investigator look into the financial relationship between them. "What did you discover?" "That Carol had borrowed $30,000 with explicit promises to repay, had spent most of it on personal luxuries, and was deeply in debt while maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't afford. When Linda asked for repayment, Carol had contacted Linda's workplace to preemptively damage her credibility." Carol's attorney tried to discredit Richard. "Mr. Morrison, isn't it true you're testifying out of bitterness over your breakup with my client?" Richard's response was calm and devastating. "I ended the relationship because I discovered her character. I'm testifying because I believe in accountability and because I witnessed firsthand how Carol portrayed her sister versus the reality of what she'd done to her sister. Those are facts, not bias." When Thomas asked about my work performance, Richard was unequivocal. "Linda is one of the most reliable ethical employees in our company. The HR allegations against her were baseless and originated from Carol's interference. Linda has since been promoted and is excelling in her role." The contrast was impossible to miss. Richard composed and credible versus Carol evasive and caught in lies. As court adjourned for the day, I glanced at the jury. Their faces told me everything I needed to know. And on day 3, the jury would decide who they believed. Day 3 began with closing arguments. Thomas stood before the jury and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who knew the evidence was on his side. "Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 3 days, you've heard a story about broken promises, financial exploitation, and deliberate cruelty. The defendant borrowed $30,000 from her sister with clear documented promises to repay. You've seen her own text message calling it a loan. You've seen the bank transfer memo saying, 'Will repay.' Instead of honoring her promise, Carol Smith spent that money on luxury vacations, expensive furniture, and personal indulgences while her sister worked and saved and lived modestly." Thomas walked them through the timeline methodically. The years of avoidance, the fire, the group chat rejection, the HR sabotage that came 3 days after I asked for repayment, the fake Facebook accounts and manipulated screenshots. You heard the voicemail where the defendant's mother tells her not to worry about repaying Linda because Linda makes good money and will be fine. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated strategy to exploit one family member for another's benefit. And when Linda finally stood up for herself, the defendant didn't apologize or try to make things right. She tried to destroy Linda's reputation and career to silence her. He paused, looking at each juror. The defendant admitted under oath that she lied to her sister about the guest room being renovated. She admitted she used the word loan. She admitted she spent the money on things that had nothing to do with her wedding. The evidence is clear and undeniable. Give Ms. Linda the justice she deserves." Carol's attorney stood for his closing, and I could see the desperation in his approach. "This is a family tragedy where everyone has been hurt. My client has already lost her relationship with Richard Morrison. She's lost her reputation in the community. She's struggling financially. Punishing her further with a $75,000 judgment will only deepen the wounds and make reconciliation impossible. Please consider that families make mistakes, and rigid legal punishment isn't always the answer to family conflicts." His words felt hollow after 3 days of evidence showing Carol's calculated choices to harm me. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Thomas and I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench that reminded me of the motel room's hard furniture, both uncomfortable places where I'd waited for my life to change direction. Thomas was calm, reviewing notes on his tablet. I couldn't sit still. "The evidence is overwhelming," he said for the 3rd time. "The only question is how much they'll award you." At 2:45, the bailiff called us back in. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The jury filed in their faces, professionally neutral. The foreman was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She reminded me of my mother, but with kinder eyes, softer edges. Judge Warren addressed the courtroom. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreman said. "Please read the verdict." The foreman looked down at the paper in her hands. "In the matter of Linda M. Smith versus Carol M. Smith, we find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." I closed my eyes briefly. Relief washed over me so powerfully that my hands started shaking. The foreman continued. "We award damages as follows: $30,000 for breach of contract, $10,500 in interest calculated at 7% annually for 5 years, $10,000 for emotional distress, $15,000 for defamation and damage to professional reputation, $8,000 in legal fees, $2,000 in punitive damages for malicious behavior. Total awarded to the plaintiff $75,500. From the defendant's table, Carol made a choking sound and put her head in her hands. Behind her in the gallery, Mom gasped loudly enough for the whole courtroom to hear. Judge Warren banged her gavel once. "The defendant is ordered to pay the plaintiff $75,500 within 90 days or face wage garnishment and asset seizure. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down again with a sound of finality. As people began filing out, one of the jurors, an older woman who'd wiped her eyes during my testimony about the voicemail, caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry you went through that." Thomas shook my hand. "You did it. You stood up to them and won." I looked across the courtroom. Carol was crying into her hands while David Brennan leaned over, speaking quietly. "I caught fragments. Can file an appeal, but it's expensive. Unlikely to succeed given the evidence. Might be better to try to negotiate a payment plan." Mom was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, something closer to shock, as if she genuinely believed until this moment that I would back down, that family loyalty would override my need for justice. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one rushing over to comfort Carol. I wasn't worried about her feelings or trying to smooth things over or making myself smaller so she could feel bigger. Carol had made her choices deliberately and repeatedly. She'd spent my money. She'd lied to my face. She'd tried to destroy my career and reputation. And now she would face the consequences. I walked out of the courthouse with Thomas into the November afternoon. The sun was setting early, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was cold and clean. The verdict wasn't just about money. It was about truth being spoken aloud in a place where my family couldn't talk over me, couldn't gaslight me, couldn't dismiss my reality. It was about a jury of strangers listening to my story and saying you were wronged and you deserve justice. But Carol couldn't pay. And that's when things got worse for her. The court gave Carol 90 days to pay the $75,500. I knew from the moment the verdict was read that she didn't have it. Thomas had shown me Carol's financial records during discovery, the maxed-out credit cards, the back rent, the personal loans from friends she'd never repaid. Carol had been living a fantasy life funded by debt and other people's money for years. I didn't hear directly from Carol during those 90 days, but I heard things. Through mutual acquaintances who didn't know they shouldn't tell me. Through the small-town gossip network that connected everyone in our community, whether they wanted to be connected or not. Carol sold her car. The luxury sedan she'd leased 3 years ago, the one she'd posted Instagram photos of with captions about treating yourself and living your best life, went to a used car dealership for $8,000. She started taking the bus, something I knew would humiliate her more than almost anything else, because Carol had always defined herself by the external markers of success. She was living full-time at Mom's house now, in the spare bedroom that still had her high school furniture. The same twin bed with the white painted frame. The same desk where she'd done homework 20 years ago. I heard she was asking friends for loans. Small amounts, mostly $1,000 here, $2,000 there. A few people helped, but their assistance came with visible discomfort and quick exits. No one wanted to be too closely associated with the woman who'd been publicly exposed for exploiting her sister and creating fake social media accounts to destroy her reputation. Mom gave Carol $5,000. I learned this from Aunt Susan, who told me in a tone that suggested I should feel guilty about it. Your mother gave Carol every penny of her savings to help with the judgment. She has nothing left now. I felt nothing when I heard that. Mom had strategized with Carol about how to avoid repaying me. She'd called me selfish for wanting my money back. She'd screamed at me at 2 a.m. for ruining Carol's life. If she chose to empty her savings account to protect Carol from the consequences of Carol's own actions, that was her choice. The local newspaper ran a story about the trial, not front page but page 3 of the local section, "Local Woman Ordered to Pay Sister $75K in Loan Dispute." The article was factual, laying out the basics of the case without editorial comment, but the headline alone was damning. Anyone who Googled Carol's name would find it immediately. By the end of the 90 days, according to what Thomas heard through legal channels, Carol had scraped together $16,000. 8 from the car, 5 from Mom. 3,000 total from various friends who'd been guilted or manipulated into helping. She was still short by $59,500. Thomas filed for enforcement the day after the 90-day deadline passed. The court issued a wage garnishment order first, which would have automatically deducted 25% of Carol's paychecks until the debt was satisfied. But Carol didn't have a job that paid enough to garnish. She'd been unemployed since the scandal with Richard, and every job application she submitted led nowhere. I found out why when Thomas showed me what employers saw when they Googled her name. The headlines were brutal: "Woman Loses Defamation Case After Creating Fake Social Media Accounts," and "Sister Ordered to Pay $75K After Refusing to Repay Loan." Articles about the trial came up on the first page of search results, complete with details about the fake Facebook accounts, the manipulated screenshots, and the voicemail where Mom told her not to worry about repaying me. No professional employer would hire someone with that digital footprint. The risk was too high, the judgment of character too clear. Carol ended up taking a part-time job at a retail store in a strip mall 20 minutes from Mom's house. Minimum wage, 25 hours a week, stocking shelves and working the register under managers young enough to be her children. I heard about it from someone who'd seen her there wearing a polo shirt with the store's logo, looking exhausted and diminished. The court moved to asset seizure next, but Carol didn't own anything worth seizing. No house, no car anymore, no valuable possessions. So the court placed a lien on any future assets or income. The debt would follow her. She couldn't buy a house or lease certain apartments without it showing up. She couldn't open new credit cards or bank accounts without the judgment appearing in background checks. It was a financial anchor that would drag on her for years, possibly decades. 6 months after the trial, I ran into someone who'd seen Carol at the grocery store. "She looks so different," the acquaintance said, shaking her head. "Tired, older. She was using coupons and buying the cheapest brands of everything." It was sad, honestly. I felt a complicated swirl of emotions hearing that. Vindication, yes. Carol was finally facing real consequences for her actions, not just getting away with exploitation because we shared DNA, but also a strange emptiness because this wasn't what I'd wanted. I hadn't wanted Carol to suffer. I'd wanted acknowledgement. I'd wanted her to say, "I'm sorry I spent your money and I should have been honest about my inability to repay you instead of attacking you." I'd wanted basic human decency and accountability. Instead, Carol had chosen to lie, to attack, to manipulate and destroy. And those choices had led her here to a minimum wage job and a twin bed in Mom's spare room, and a future shadowed by a $75,000 judgment she'd likely never fully pay. Her Instagram hadn't been updated in 8 months. The account was still there, public, frozen in time at a version of Carol's life that no longer existed. Photos of restaurant meals that cost more than she now made in a day. Weekend trips to wine country, shopping bags from expensive boutiques. The captions were all about self-care and treating yourself and living your best life, and they read now like artifacts from someone else's existence. I didn't follow her account anymore, but sometimes late at night I'd look at it trying to understand how the person who posted those photos had become the person who stole from her sister and then tried to destroy her sister's life to cover it up. Carol's friend group had evaporated. The women she used to brunch with on Sundays and take weekend trips with had quietly distanced themselves. No one wanted to be associated with someone who'd been publicly exposed for the kind of cruelty and deception that made people question your fundamental character. Social ties in our community were based partially on reputation, and Carol's reputation was irreparably damaged. I heard through mutual connections that Carol left the house mainly for work and essential errands. No social engagements, no dinners out, no trips or adventures. She'd become invisible in a way that she would have found unbearable 2 years ago, when her entire identity was built on being seen, admired, envied. Mom, I heard, was bitter about the whole situation. She'd stopped attending her church group because people asked too many questions. She'd withdrawn from her volunteer positions because she couldn't stand the sympathetic looks and carefully worded comments. The judgment against Carol had become a judgment against Mom too, in the eyes of the community, because everyone knew Mom had enabled and protected Carol's behavior. Dad, I heard almost nothing about. He'd always been the silent one, the background figure in our family's dynamics. Whatever he thought about what had happened, he kept to himself. Sometimes I'd be driving through town and I'd see Carol at a bus stop wearing her retail uniform, looking at her phone while she waited. She looked smaller somehow. Older. The confidence and polish that had once defined her were gone, replaced by something that looked like defeat. I never stopped. I never waved. We existed in the same town but in completely different realities, now separated by the truth that had finally been spoken aloud in a courtroom and validated by a jury of strangers. The vindication I felt wasn't triumphant. It was quieter than that. More like relief that I'd stood up for myself and the system had acknowledged I was right. That Carol's version of reality where I was dramatic and jealous and she was the victim had been definitively rejected by people who'd heard all the evidence. But underneath that relief was a sadness that it had come to this. That my family had been so broken, so dysfunctional, so committed to protecting one child at the expense of the other, that it had taken a lawsuit and a public trial to force any accountability at all. I didn't want Carol to suffer forever. I just wanted her to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't exploit people indefinitely, and expect no repercussions, that cruelty and deception eventually catch up with you. Whether Carol had learned those lessons, I didn't know. We didn't speak. We didn't see each other. We were strangers now, connected only by blood and a court judgment, and a history of pain that couldn't be undone. And then came the letters I never expected, from Dad. 8 months after the trial, I was finally settling into a life that felt like mine. I'd moved out of the short-term furnished apartment into a real place, a 2-bedroom with hardwood floors and windows that faced east, catching the morning sun. I'd furnished it slowly, carefully choosing pieces I actually wanted instead of what was affordable or practical. The court-ordered payments from Carol came in small installments garnished from her minimum wage paychecks, barely making a dent in what she owed, but at least acknowledging the debt existed. I was home on a Saturday afternoon, reading on my couch with tea cooling on the side table, when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment I considered not answering, but curiosity won. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing in the hallway, holding a small wooden box, looking older and more tired than I remembered. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home. This was the man who'd responded to my desperate message the night of the fire with a thumbs-up emoji. The man who'd sat silent in the courtroom while I testified about a lifetime of being treated as less important than Carol. The man who'd chosen the easy path of silence for 38 years. But there was something different in his face. Something broken and sad that I'd never seen before. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Linda," he said, his voice rough. "I know I have no right to be here, but I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" I stood in the doorway for a long moment, weighing whether I had the emotional energy for whatever this conversation would be. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked into my apartment slowly, looking around at the space I'd built without any help from my family. He sat on my couch where I gestured, setting the wooden box carefully on the coffee table between us. "I've been wanting to come for months," he said, "but I didn't know if you'd see me, and I had to get this ready first." He opened the box with hands that shook slightly. Inside were 7 letters each in a sealed envelope, each addressed to Linda, in my father's careful handwriting. No stamps, no postmarks, never mailed. "I wrote to you over the years," Dad said, his voice shaking. "Times when I saw what was happening and wanted to reach out, wanted to tell you that I saw the unfairness and that I was sorry. But I never sent them." He spread them out on my coffee table. The dates written on the envelope spanned from 2010 to 2024. 14 years of letters he'd written, but never had the courage to send. I picked up the first one with trembling hands. The envelope was yellowed slightly with age. I opened it and unfolded the letter inside, written on lined notebook paper in Dad's blocky print. "Linda, I'm sorry I couldn't stand up for you when Mom decided to send Carol to the out-of-state school and told you to stay local. You deserved the same opportunities. I should have fought harder, but I've never been good at standing up to your mother. I took the easy road and you paid the price. I see you working so hard at community college and your part-time job, and I'm ashamed that I didn't fight for you to have what Carol has. You deserved better. I'm sorry. Dad." And the letter was dated September 2010. I would have been 23 years old, exhausted from juggling classes and work watching Carol's Instagram posts from her expensive private university. I opened the second letter, dated June 2018. "Linda, I know you gave Carol the wedding money. I argued with Mom about it because I knew it was wrong to ask you for your entire savings. But Mom said if I pushed the issue, she'd make sure I couldn't see Carol anymore. I was afraid of losing my daughter, so I let you down. I'm sorry. You've always been the strong one, the independent one, and we've used that as an excuse to take from you. It's not fair. You deserve to have that money for your own dreams. I'm sorry." My hands were shaking now. I opened the third letter. "Linda, I saw you at Christmas and you looked so tired. You work so hard and ask for so little. Meanwhile, Carol complains constantly and gets everything she wants. Mom asked me to contribute to Carol's car down payment, but when I suggested we help you too, she said you didn't need help because you're responsible with money. I didn't fight it, I should have. I'm sorry." The fourth letter was from 2020. The fifth from 2022. Each one documented a specific moment when Dad had seen the unfairness, had felt the wrongness of how I was treated, and had chosen silence over confrontation. Each one ended with, "I'm sorry." The seventh and final letter was dated December 2024, just 2 months ago. "Linda, I sat in that courtroom and heard you testify about your whole life. I heard the voicemail where your mother plotted with Carol to avoid paying you back. I watched Carol lie on the stand. I saw the evidence of her creating fake accounts to destroy you, and I realized that my silence made me complicit in everything they did to you. I've lost you, and I deserve to have lost you. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I saw what happened. I saw it all, and I was too weak to stop it. I'm sorry." By the time I finished reading all 7 letters, tears were streaming down my face. Not tears of forgiveness, but tears of grief for what could have been different if my father had found his voice even once over the past 14 years. I looked at him sitting on my couch, this man who'd been a shadow in my childhood, always present, but never protective, always watching, but never intervening. "Why didn't you send these?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why didn't you just call me or stand up for me?" Dad's face crumpled. "Because I'm a coward, Linda. I've been afraid of your mother my whole marriage. She's the strong personality, the decision-maker, the one who knows what she wants and demands it. I learned early that disagreeing with her meant fights that lasted days, tension that filled the house, weeks of cold silence and passive-aggressive comments. It was easier to go along, easier to let her make the decisions and pretend I had no choice in how things unfolded." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "And Carol was her favorite. I knew if I took your side on anything, if I defended you or questioned how you were treated, Your mother would freeze me out along with you. She'd make sure I couldn't see Carol. She'd punish me the same way she punished you by making me invisible, by withdrawing affection and approval. So I chose the easy path. Every single time. I told myself I was keeping the peace, that I was protecting the family, but really I was just protecting myself. You were my father, I said quietly. You were supposed to protect me. I know. His voice broke completely. I know. And I failed you in every way that mattered. I watched your mother give Carol everything while giving you scraps. I watched her manipulate you into giving Carol your life savings. I watched her gaslight you and blame you and make you feel like you were the problem. And I said nothing. I did nothing. He took a shaky breath. The trial was the breaking point for me. Sitting in that courtroom watching you testify about being 8 years old and making the honor roll while Carol got a party for a spelling bee. Hearing that voicemail where your mother casually discussed keeping your money because you make good money and will be fine. Watching Carol lie under oath and then watching her get exposed with all that evidence of the fake accounts and the manipulated screenshots. Seeing you stand up there with so much dignity while you detailed every single way we failed you. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't sit at dinner with your mother and listen to her talk about how you'd ruined Carol's life by demanding accountability. I couldn't live in that house and act like what happened to you was acceptable. So I moved out. I'm living in a rental across town. Your mother and I are separated. Not divorced yet, but separated. This was news to me. I hadn't heard anything about my parents separating. When, 3 months ago, right after Carol lost her appeal attempt and the judgment was finalized, your mother wanted me to contribute to paying your judgment. She said it was a family obligation to help Carol. I refused. I told her that if she'd taught Carol accountability instead of enabling her cruelty, we wouldn't be in this situation. We had the biggest fight of our marriage. I moved out the next day. He gestured to the letters spread across my coffee table. I've been writing these for 14 years. Every time I saw something unfair, I'd write a letter I never sent. I told myself that someday I'd have the courage to give them to you, to apologize, to try to make things right. But I never did. I just kept writing and hiding them in a box in my workshop. Why now? I asked. Why bring them now? Because I've lost you anyway, he said simply. Because I finally realized that my silence cost me the one thing I was trying to protect, my relationship with my daughter, not Carol, you. I've lost you, Linda, and I deserve to have lost you. But I needed you to know that I saw what happened. I saw it all. Every unfairness, every cruelty, every moment you were treated as less important. And I was too weak to stop it. I sat with those words, with the weight of 14 years of unsent letters, with the knowledge that my father had watched me suffer and done nothing. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally. I know, he said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know the truth. That you weren't imagining the unfairness. That it wasn't in your head. That you deserved better than what we gave you. And I'm sorry I didn't fight for you when you needed me to. We sat in silence for a long time, the letters spread between us like evidence of all the ways my family had failed me. But forgiveness wasn't something I could give easily. I looked at my father sitting on my couch, surrounded by 14 years of unsent letters, and spoke the truth that had been building in my chest since he'd arrived. I appreciate that you're acknowledging what happened, I said, keeping my voice steady. But 7 letters you never sent don't undo 38 years of silence when it mattered. You were an adult. You were my father. And you chose your comfort over my well-being every single time. You watched Mom drain my savings twice. You watched Carol exploit me. You watched me get rejected when my house burned down. And you did nothing except send a thumbs-up emoji. Dad nodded, his face crumpling, but his eyes steady on mine. I know. You're right. I have no defense for what I did or what I didn't do. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Linda. I'm not asking for us to go back to how things were, because how things were was fundamentally broken. I just needed you to know that I see now what I did. I see how I failed you, and I'm sorry." He took a breath. "If you want me in your life going forward, it'll be on your terms with whatever boundaries you need. And if you don't want me in your life at all, I'll understand that too. I'll accept whatever you decide." I sat with that for a long moment, looking at this man who'd been a ghost in my childhood present, but not protective, watching, but never intervening. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave and never come back. That part was tired of being hurt by people who shared my DNA. But another part of me saw something in his face I'd never seen before: genuine remorse, genuine understanding of what he'd done. "I'm not ready to have a full relationship," I said finally. "But if you want to start over very slowly, coffee every couple months, texting occasionally, I'm willing to try. But there are conditions. I won't be around Mom or Carol. I won't attend family events where they're present. I won't hear about how they're doing or be asked to reconcile with them. And if you ever side with them against me again, if you ever pressure me to forgive them or make peace, we're done permanently. Do you understand?" "I understand," Dad said immediately. "I've already separated myself from that dynamic. I moved out 3 months ago. I'm renting a small place across town. Your mother and I are separated, not legally divorced yet, but living completely separate lives. I can't be in that house anymore, can't sit at that dinner table and pretend what happened to you was acceptable." "What about Carol?" I asked. "I see her occasionally," Dad admitted. "She's still living with your mother, but I don't discuss you with her and I don't discuss her with you. I'm trying to maintain separate relationships with my daughters, if that's even possible at this point." "It's possible," I said, "as long as you understand that those relationships will never be equal again. You can't balance me and Carol on some kind of scale. You spent 38 years tipping that scale in her favor. If you want a relationship with me, it exists independent of whatever relationship you have with her." "I understand," he said again. We sat in my living room for another hour, not saying much, but the silence felt different than the silences of my childhood. Less empty. More like the beginning of something honest, even if it was small and fragile. When Dad left, I sat alone with the letters spread across my coffee table. I read through them one more time, then put them back in the wooden box. I placed the box on a shelf in my bedroom, not hidden, but not displayed. Evidence of what had been, but not the foundation of what would be. Over the following months, I focused my energy not on rebuilding relationships with my biological family, but on nurturing the connections I'd built with people who'd actually shown up for me. I started volunteering regularly at the Disaster Relief Center, where I'd first told my story 18 months ago. The center helped people who'd lost their homes in fires, floods, and other disasters navigate the complicated process of insurance claims, temporary housing, and rebuilding. I knew that process intimately, now knew every frustrating phone call and confusing form, and I could help people avoid the mistakes I'd made. One of the other regular volunteers was a woman named Patricia in her early 50s who'd lost her house in a flood 3 years ago. We connected immediately over the shared experience of watching everything you own disappear and then discovering which people in your life actually cared. Patricia had gone through her own version of family betrayal. Her brother had refused to help her then, had the audacity to ask her for money 6 months later. We started meeting for coffee every Saturday morning at a place near the community center. Not to talk about our families or our losses, but to talk about everything else: books we were reading, shows we were watching, plans for the future. Patricia had a dry sense of humor and a directness I appreciated. When I was spiraling about something, she'd say, "Is that actually true, or is that your family's voice in your head?" And I'd realize it was the latter. She helped me move into my new apartment, showing up with her truck and her girlfriend, and spending an entire Saturday hauling boxes and assembling furniture. When I tried to thank her, she waved it off. This is what people do for each other. This is normal. At work, my mentor Sarah had become more than just a professional connection. She was in her late 40s, had 2 teenage kids, and had a way of seeing through my practiced independence to the person underneath who was still learning to accept help. She invited me to her family's Thanksgiving dinner, and I almost said no out of habit. But Patricia had looked at me over coffee and said, "Stop refusing good things, because you think you don't deserve them." So I went to Sarah's Thanksgiving. Her house was chaotic in the best way, her kids arguing good-naturedly about football, her husband telling dad jokes, her mother asking me about my life with genuine interest. The table was crowded and loud and warm. When Sarah's daughter asked me to help her make the mashed potatoes, I found myself standing in the kitchen with this teenager who treated me like I belonged there, like my presence was wanted and not just tolerated. It was the first Thanksgiving in my life where I felt actually welcome, instead of like an obligation. Jennifer from the community center checked in on me regularly through text, sending me resources for other people who'd experienced family estrangement, articles about setting boundaries, and occasional memes that made me laugh. She'd been the one who'd filmed that original video, and she still felt protective of my story in a way that was touching rather than invasive. Richard and I maintained a friendly professional relationship. He'd advocated for my promotion to senior project manager, which came with a significant raise and actual authority to make decisions. We'd have coffee occasionally to discuss work projects, and he never once brought up Carol or made me feel like I owed him anything for helping me. His help had been freely given, motivated by principle rather than expectation of gratitude. Even Thomas Chen, my attorney, had become someone I thought of with warmth. He sent me a card 6 months after the trial with a simple message: "You showed remarkable courage. I'm glad I could help you get justice." That card was pinned to my bulletin board in my home office. These people, Patricia, Sarah, Jennifer, Richard, Thomas, had demonstrated through consistent actions that they cared about my well-being. They showed up. They listened. They helped without making me feel small for needing help. They celebrated my successes without resentment. They were honest with me when I needed to hear hard truths. At the volunteer appreciation dinner at the community center in December, almost 18 months after the fire, I was asked to say a few words. I stood up in front of the room full of people who'd supported me through the hardest year of my life, and I spoke from the heart. "A year and a half ago, I lost my house in a fire," I began. For a while, I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to me. Losing all my possessions, all my memories, the home I'd spent 15 years building. But I learned something important in the months that followed. Losing a building was nothing compared to learning I'd never truly had a family. I saw Patricia nodding, her eyes bright. My biological family taught me that family is supposed to be conditional. That love is something you earn by being useful, by not needing too much, by making yourself small so others can shine. They taught me that blood relations mean you're supposed to accept mistreatment and call it loyalty. I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd shown me a different way. But the people in this room taught me something different. You taught me that family is something you build with trust and kindness and consistent action. You taught me that real family shows up when things are hard. Real family doesn't keep score. Real family doesn't ask you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable. My voice caught slightly. Thank you for being my real family. Thank you for teaching me what I deserved all along. The room broke into applause. Patricia stood up and hugged me tightly. Sarah squeezed my hand. Jennifer was crying happy tears. I'd spent 38 years trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. I'd spent 38 years believing that family was something you were stuck with, something you had to accept no matter how much it hurt you. But I'd learned something better. Family wasn't about blood, it was about choice. And I was choosing these people, the ones who'd proven through action that they valued me, that they saw me, that they wanted me in their lives, not because of obligation, but because of genuine care. I'd lost my biological family, but I'd gained something infinitely more valuable. I'd gained a family I chose and who chose me back. But one more person wasn't done with our story. 18 months after the fire, I stood in front of my rebuilt house and felt something I'd never felt about any place I'd lived before. Peace. Complete, uncomplicated peace. The house was smaller than the original, more efficiently designed with an open floor plan that made every room feel connected and warm. The insurance payout and the court-ordered installment payments from Carol, garnished from her minimum wage paychecks at $25 a week, monitored by the court, had given me enough to rebuild thoughtfully rather than quickly. I'd chosen every detail myself. Wide windows in the kitchen that caught the morning sun. A back porch perfect for evening tea. A garden I'd planted with my own hands, something I'd never had time for in my old life, but now found meditative and grounding. Inside the walls held artwork from local artists I'd met through the community center. The furniture was pieces I'd chosen because I loved them, not because they were practical or on sale. Photos on the mantel showed Patricia and me at a volunteer event, Sarah's family at Thanksgiving, Jennifer and her partner at the community center anniversary celebration. My chosen family, the people who'd proven through action that they valued me. I hosted a small gathering the weekend the house was officially finished. Not a traditional housewarming party, but an intimate dinner for the people who'd helped me survive and rebuild. Patricia arrived first with wine and a succulent plant. "For your new beginning," she said, hugging me tightly. Sarah came with her husband carrying a framed print of a phoenix rising. "Too on the nose?" she asked, laughing. "I hung it in the living room anyway." Richard stopped by with a bookstore gift certificate, remembering I'd mentioned wanting to read more. Jennifer brought her partner and an enthusiasm that filled the room. Thomas Chen made a brief appearance, shaking my hand formally before saying with genuine warmth, "You've built something beautiful here, Linda. Not just the house, your whole life." Even Dad came arriving late and looking nervous, carrying a handmade wooden shelf he'd built in his workshop. "For your books," he said quietly, "if you want it." I did want it. It was a small thing, but it was his hands making something useful for me, which felt like a language he was learning to speak. We sat around my new dining table, a solid oak piece I'd found at an estate sale, and refinished myself, eating pasta I'd made and drinking the wine Patricia brought. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences. At one point, Sarah raised her glass. "To Linda, who showed us all what real strength looks like." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt tears form, but they were different from the tears I'd cried in that motel room 18 months ago. These were tears of gratitude and belonging. After everyone left, I sat on my back porch with tea cooling in my hands, looking at the garden I'd planted. Tomatoes were starting to ripen. Herbs filled the air with their scent. The evening was quiet except for distant traffic and birds settling for the night. I thought about Carol, still living in Mom's spare room, still making minimum wage, still paying $25 a week toward a debt she'd never fully repay. I thought about Mom, whose church friends had distanced themselves, whose perfect family image had shattered publicly. I didn't feel triumph about their struggles, just a quiet acknowledgement that they'd created their own consequences. My phone buzzed, a text from Dad. "Thank you for letting me be there tonight. I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm grateful for it." I typed back, "One step at a time." I looked at my house, at the garden growing in soil I'd prepared, at the life I'd built from nothing, with the help of people who'd chosen to stand beside me. I didn't need my biological family to validate me anymore. I'd found something better than their conditional love. I'd found people who showed up. I'd found myself. Because sometimes a house has to burn for a woman to rise. And that's where Linda's story ends, not with revenge, but with rebirth. Not with her family's apology, but with her own liberation. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to Linda's journey. Stories like this remind us that family isn't always the people we're born to. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stand beside us when everything falls apart. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Have you ever had to set boundaries with people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? Your stories matter, and this community is a safe space to share them. If Linda's story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these real-life stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to walk away from toxic family dynamics, that it's okay to choose yourself. And here's my question for you. Do you think Linda should have given her father a second chance? Or should she have cut him off completely like she did with her mother and Carol? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. Remember, you are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You deserve people who show up for you the way Linda's chosen family showed up for her. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.